Hey, where are you right now? Who knows? Don't mess with me. There's nothing of ours in the house. What's going on? Well, I took all my stuff and left. Huh? I don't get it. Why would you do that? Well, we got divorced. So it's not strange for me to leave, right? Divorced? Yeah, I filed for divorce. My name is Claire. I'm 35 years old and work in an office. I've been married to my husband, Evan, for 5 years. Evan used to work for a company, but 2 years ago, he quit and started his own business. Unfortunately, the business hasn't been doing well, and we've been losing money for the past 2 years. Thankfully, my income is enough to keep us afloat. Our relationship is okay, nothing special, but not bad either. The real problem is my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who live in Evan's family home. They treat me horribly. Every time I see them, they make fun of me and always find something to complain about. It makes me feel sad and stressed. Evan and I live in an apartment that's about a 10-minute drive from his family's home, and he often takes me there. In the beginning, I went along for his sake, but their bullying got worse over time, so I started talking back. Even then, they didn't stop. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law always try to get money from me too. Hey Claire, I need $500 for a friend's birthday present. Can you give me the money? $500? What are you buying? A trip, and I'm going too. No way, that's like I'm giving the gift, and I can't afford $500. You're so stingy, Claire. Are you a miser? Evan supports you, and you can't even do this? Excuse me, I'm the one supporting him. My husband hasn't contributed a single cent to our living expenses in the past year. And you, sister-in-law, should get a job. You're a grown adult still living at home doing nothing. Why does my mother-in-law allow her to live like this? I wanted to say all of this, but my husband interrupted me. Hey Claire, I need $500 for a friend's birthday present. Wow, Evan, you're such a thoughtful son, said his mom. Then my sister-in-law added, can I have $300 for something I want? My husband quickly replied, sure, Claire has $300 in her wallet, right? Just give it to her. Without hesitation, my husband made me hand over the money to my sister-in-law. He acted like it was no big deal. He even started saying things like, thanks to me, we can live such a luxurious life. I couldn't believe the things coming out of his mouth. Later, in the car, I confronted him. Why do you always show off like that? I have my pride as the eldest son, he said, and the argument only got worse from there. He added, once you start giving them money, they'll expect more. But what's wrong with making my mom happy? I replied, we can't live so extravagantly. Do you realize you haven't contributed to our living expenses at all? So what? We got a nice bonus this summer. Don't rely on that. We need to save that money. Since then, my husband and I have been constantly fighting. I don't understand how he can act so arrogant when he's not even helping with the bills. Why does he feel the need to always be in control when he's not pulling his weight? My husband's bad qualities were becoming more obvious over time. I started to think, why should I do things I hate for someone like him? So, when he recently said, hey, we're going to my mom's, I told him, go by yourself. He responded with some strange reasoning. It's normal for the wife to come along too. I shot back, well, then you must be abnormal, since you never come when I visit my parents. He got annoyed, clicked his tongue, and said, do whatever you want, then left to go to his parents' house alone. A weekend without my mother-in-law and sister-in-law? It felt so relaxing and peaceful. With some free time, I worked on my dream, buying my own home. I researched online, ordered pamphlets, and imagined how I'd decorate my future house. I spent hours looking at furniture and thinking about how I'd arrange everything in my new place. Time flew by, and soon it was evening, and my husband came back. Oh, welcome back, I said. He didn't respond. Was he still mad? How childish. Shouldn't he act more mature? I wasn't interested in pleasing him, so I didn't try to make conversation. Instead, I just started making dinner. Suddenly, he spoke up. You've been acting pretty bold lately, huh? Refusing to meet my mom and the rest of them. Bold? We're equals in this marriage. Besides, your mom and sister are always picking on me, so I don't want to go there anymore. That's exactly what I'm talking about, acting cheeky. Normally, wives listen to their husbands. If you can't do that, we'll get divorced. Divorce? Yeah, divorce. Surprised? You don't want me to divorce you, do you? But I'm really angry at you. I've already signed my part of the papers, ready to submit anytime. I'll let this slide for now, but if you defy me again, it'll be immediate divorce. Think about that. With a smirk, he added, I'm going to take a bath. Hurry up and make dinner. As soon as I heard my husband was in the bath, I couldn't help but celebrate quietly. Yes, now I can leave him whenever I want. I made dinner in a great mood. From that moment on, I focused on saving money. I was almost ready to make the down payment on my new house. It was hard to hide my excitement, but I managed to stay calm around my husband. Finally, I bought a house in my own name. All that was left was to finalize the divorce and leave the home I shared with my husband. I started packing my things little by little, without him noticing, and sent them to my parents' house. I had already told my parents everything, and they understood my situation. When my husband went to his parents' house one weekend, I moved all my stuff into my new house. It was perfect. The house was just as I had imagined, both inside and out. The smell of the new home filled the air, and I spent the whole day enjoying it. That night, my husband called. Hey, where are you? Where could I be? I replied, not giving anything away. Don't mess with me. There's nothing left in the house. What's going on? Well, I took all my stuff and left. What? Why would you do that? I don't understand. Since we're divorced, it's only natural for me to move out, right? Huh? Divorced? Yes, I submitted the divorce papers. We're strangers now. Don't mess with me. I won't accept that. But you're the one who said we could divorce anytime. As a businessman, you should take responsibility for your words. Anyway, this is the end for us. With that, I hung up. Finally, I was free from him. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in a long while. Living in my new house was everything I dreamed of, and every morning I woke up feeling refreshed, ready to enjoy my new life. Today, I decided to invite my parents to my new home for the first time. As I was cooking in the kitchen, they arrived with a bottle of celebratory sake. They were both surprised to see my new house, and the three of us toasted to celebrate. Even though it was a bit early, we started a small party. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Who could that be? I wondered. When I checked the intercom, I was shocked to see my ex-husband, ex-mother-in-law, and ex-sister-in-law. Why are you here? I asked. We're going to live here from today, my ex-husband said. My father is in the hospital, but when he's discharged, he'll live here too. Open the door right now. No way. That's ridiculous. Why would I let you in? Please leave my property immediately. Then my ex-mother-in-law stepped forward and said, You cheeky girl, what's yours is mine. Open the door now. I calmly replied, What are you talking about? I'm single now. Huh? What do you mean? She asked, confused. Did your son not tell you? We're already divorced. We're strangers now. The ex-mother-in-law and ex-sister-in-law turned to my ex-husband, who seemed to be explaining something, probably trying to deny it. I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but it didn't matter. Anyway, you can't come in, please leave, I said, then hung up the intercom. My ex-husband started banging on the door, shouting, Open up, I want to talk. As I was thinking about how to get rid of him, a police car pulled up in front of my house. The police quickly took him into custody. When I opened the door, I saw my ex-husband being pinned to the ground, resisting and shouting, It hurts, why is this happening to me? My ex-mother-in-law and ex-sister-in-law were standing there, completely shocked after learning about the divorce. Although they weren't arrested, they were escorted away in the police car. After watching my ex-husband and his family get taken away by the police, I went back inside the house. I wondered, who called the cops? Then, my dad made a peace sign. In situations like this, you call the police right away, he said, always calm and collected. Trust my dad. We resumed our celebration with more drinks. As for how my ex-husband found out where I lived, it turns out he followed me home from work. He even confessed to stalking me, so if he shows up again, he'll be arrested immediately. Knowing his timid personality, I doubt he'll come near the house again. I also got a restraining order against his family, just in case. After the divorce, my ex-husband's business continued to struggle, and he fell deeper into debt. Without my money to rely on, he and his family had no income, especially with his father still in the hospital. Eventually, they had to sell their house. It really felt like they got what they deserved. On the other hand, I invited my parents to live with me in my new home. They're so happy and proud of me, saying I've been a good daughter. They're enjoying life in the house, and we're living together as a happy, close-knit family. I plan to continue cherishing my parents and enjoying this new chapter of our lives.
I was escorted into a plain, unadorned room that resembled an interrogation chamber. A friendly-looking police officer motioned for me to take a seat. According to Doris, the kerosene you gave her turned out to be gasoline, which caused the kerosene heater to ignite and start a fire. He said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied my reaction. When the officer inquired about where I store my kerosene, I explained that I had recently changed the storage location. About 3 months ago, I noticed an increase in kerosene consumption. Suspecting theft, I moved the kerosene to a locked shed and replaced it with gasoline in the original container. I see. The officer said, his gaze intensifying as he scrutinized me closely. His penetrating stare made me uncomfortable, and I shifted uneasily in my seat. As I reflected on my actions with a clearer head, I began to realize how unusual they might seem. If someone were to mistakenly steal what they believed to be kerosene from its usual location, only to find gasoline in its place, it could certainly lead to trouble. Forgive me for being blunt, but did you suspect that Doris was stealing your kerosene? Is that why you put gasoline where the kerosene used to be? Were you hoping that some kind of problem would arise from this switch? The officer asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and accusation. I looked up at the officer, startled by his directness. Although he had initially seemed genial and approachable, his eyes now gleamed with a sharp intensity as he sought to uncover the truth behind the incident. As I struggled to find the right words to respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway, growing louder as someone approached the room where we sat. "Connie!" A familiar voice called out. It was my husband, Finn. Still dressed in his work suit and clutching our son Evan's handheld game console. After catching his breath, Finn looked directly at the two police officers and spoke in a clear, unwavering voice. "Connie is innocent. Please, take a look at this," he said, holding up the game console for them to see. The evidence Finn presented on that little device would ultimately clear me of any suspicion. My name is Connie, and I'm a 41-year-old. I'm a part-time worker living in an old, single-family home with my husband Finn and our 9-year-old son, Evan. Though our house is modest, I adore the small garden that comes with it. We live in a rural area with no nearby grocery stores, and getting around without a car can be a challenge. However, the people in our community are warm, friendly, and kind, making it a pleasant place to call home. Having my in-laws and sister-in-law living in the neighborhood adds an extra layer of comfort and security. When Evan was younger and our entire family came down with the flu, my in-laws came over to take care of us. Knowing that we have reliable family members close by is incredibly reassuring. "Hello, Connie." Doris, my sister-in-law, would often greet me as she frequently visited our home. Unlike my husband Finn, who is relatively quiet and reserved, Doris is straightforward and speaks her mind without hesitation. This stark contrast between the siblings made it difficult for me to warm up to her initially. "Connie, you need to keep all the windows in your house open. A home needs proper ventilation, or it'll deteriorate over time. No one's going to break in around here, and it's not like you have anything worth stealing anyway," Doris said casually as she proceeded to open every window in the house without a second thought. Before I got married, I didn't exactly live in a big city, but I was always taught to lock up properly even if I was just going out for a short trip to the neighborhood. That's why I couldn't help but feel a bit of a gap with Doris's way of thinking. One time, Doris offered to drive Evan and me to the supermarket. As I was about to lock up, Doris said to me in exasperation, "Hold on, don't lock the door." I stood frozen at the front door, holding the key, and blurted out, "Huh? What do you think will happen if a burglar tries to break in while you're away and finds the door locked? They might set the house on fire, you know?" "What? Excuse me?" "In this area, it's been a long-standing tradition not to lock up and to leave a decent amount of money in a visible spot. That way, if a burglar does break in, they'll just take the money and leave quickly, right? Doris said smugly. Still holding the key, I wondered to myself what era this kind of thinking belonged to. After a few seconds of silence, I put the key in my bag. The house key was left unlocked. I couldn't ignore my sister-in-law's opinion, so I decided to comply in front of Doris. Even so, I felt uncomfortable leaving the front door unlocked. Doris would make fun of me for being paranoid about locking up properly, telling Evan about it. As a result, Evan started to tease me a little too. "Mom, if you lock all the doors, the neighbors will start to worry," he said with a grin. "Burglars set fire to houses they can't break into. Is that how it goes?" I sighed. At first, I was grateful that Doris would play with Evan, but seeing him gradually influenced by her words made me feel down. Moreover, Doris had become quite at home in our house, and I began to think her behavior while at our place was a bit presumptuous. One day, Doris helped herself to some of the meals I had prepared and stored away, taking them home without asking. When I opened the fridge, the food I had put in a container was gone. I thought Finn might have eaten it as a snack with his evening drink, but... "Huh? I didn't eat it." "Oh, earlier, when Doris was leaving, she took something out of the fridge and took it with her." "Hey, you should say something to her about that, Finn." "Well, she does play with Evan, so cut her some slack, will ya?" I pursed my lips and closed the fridge. As I was washing my hands, getting ready to make dinner, I suddenly had a thought and headed to the bathroom. Huh! The amount of cosmetics I always use had decreased. The hairbrush was in a different position, and it looked like someone had used it. Sighing softly, I went back to the kitchen and checked the snack shelf. The chocolates and potato chips I had bought for Evan were gone. "Now this is a bit much." Muttering to myself, I tried to make sense of the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. As the red light of dusk streamed through the window, I stepped out into the garden to clear my head. In the yard, Evan was staring intently at the screen of his game console. Playing games even in the yard? I shrugged my shoulders and gazed at the sun setting behind the mountains. It's so beautiful. After I'm done admiring it for a little longer, I need to start preparing dinner. "Mom, look at this! Look at this!" Evan turned the screen of his game console towards me, and I quickly turned my back on the setting sun. "All right, I need to get dinner ready." "Mom, here!" "Doesn't this look kind of weird?" "I don't understand games." "You should do some studying before dinner time, you know." Evan, still holding his game console, dropped his shoulders and pouted. Leaving him behind, I returned to the kitchen. No good. Somehow, deep in my chest, there's a knot-like feeling that won't go away. Mustering my courage, I took out my smartphone and sent a message to my mother-in-law, Ellie. I prefaced the message by expressing my gratitude for Doris taking care of Evan at our house, but then mentioned that I'd like her to stop using and taking our things without permission. A little while later, Ellie called me. "I'm sorry, Connie. I'll subtly mention it to Doris. I'll make sure to talk to her properly so that she doesn't leave a bad impression on you." Ellie is such a wonderful person, always considerate like this. From that day on, Doris continued to visit as usual and spend time happily with Evan, but she stopped using the fridge and my personal belongings without permission. I don't know how Ellie conveyed the message, but I was relieved that the problem was resolved without creating an awkward relationship. After this issue was smoothly resolved, it was the following Sunday. Now, a different problem surfaced in our household. One night, after Evan had fallen asleep, I was balancing the household accounts when I noticed that the kerosene expenses had gone up. It had been getting a bit warmer lately, and we were using the kerosene heater less frequently, so why? Flipping through the pages of the account book, I saw that the prices had skyrocketed starting 3 months ago. Come to think of it, lately, Finn had been frequently going to the gas station to buy kerosene because we were running out. Just then, Finn came into the living room after finishing his shower. Sitting across the table from him as he was about to drink a can of beer, I handed him the household account book.
Lately, our kerosene expenses have been abnormally high. It started 3 months ago.
Huh? Oh, you're right. I didn't feel like we were using that much, though. Come to think of it, I did notice that the kerosene we store outside was depleting faster than usual. I had a bad feeling about this. At our house, we stored the kerosene next to the garbage disposal area, a short distance from the front door. We kept it in a storage box, but we didn't lock it or anything. Even though it was on our property, anyone could take it, and the thought that maybe one of our neighbors was stealing it made me feel uneasy. Well, we don't know who's stealing it, but maybe we should stop storing it outside. The shed has a shutter, so it might be a bit of a hassle, but wouldn't it be more secure to keep it in there? It seemed like a waste to have the storage box we bought sitting empty. It's a bit troublesome, but I guess we have no choice. Hey, you know the lawnmower we use for yard work? Let's put the gasoline we use for that in the storage box. I see. That would be convenient when I'm doing yard work. Let's do that. The gasoline cans are clearly labeled gasoline, so if someone's only interested in stealing kerosene, they probably won't take them, right? Well, if they start stealing the gasoline too, we'll deal with that when the time comes. Finn smiled and gulped down the rest of his beer. 2 days later, when I came home from work, I was greeted by an unexpected scene at the front door. Evan was standing there with a troubled expression, along with a police officer. Instinctively, I thought Evan must have done something wrong and turned pale. I got off my bike and cautiously approached them. I immediately called out to the police officer. The friendly-looking officer confirmed my identity and said with a serious expression, "Please accompany us to the police station."
What? Did Evan do something bad?
No, it's you, Connie, who would like to come with us. We'll discuss the details at the police station. Evan looked at me with a worried expression. When Finn got home, I was taken to the police station in a patrol car. Upon arriving at the station, I sensed a tense atmosphere. I was led into a plain, simple room that resembled an interrogation room. The friendly-looking officer motioned for me to sit down and slowly began to explain the situation. You know Doris, right?
Oh, yes, of course. She's my husband's sister.
Actually, this morning, there was a fire at Doris's house, and the doghouse where she kept her dog outside burned down. I listened to the officer's story, tilting my head in confusion. To summarize, here's what happened. There was a small doghouse in the yard of Doris's house, and apparently, it caught fire while she was heating it with a kerosene heater. A neighbor who noticed the fire evacuated the dog, but the doghouse was completely burned down. The doghouse was in a shaded area and probably cold, so, for that reason, she had purposely taken the kerosene heater she used inside the house and put it outside to warm the doghouse. I felt a slight headache coming on. If the dog she kept outside was cold, instead of going to the trouble of using a kerosene heater outside, why not just keep it inside the house, at least during the cold season? Well, that might be a matter of perspective for a dog owner, but the question is, why did they contact me about a fire caused by using a kerosene heater? The friendly-looking police officer gave me a troubled look. Doris mentioned that she called you several times. Did you not hear your phone? He said. I took my smartphone out of my bag and saw numerous missed calls from Doris. I had my phone on silent, so I hadn't noticed, but there were many missed calls and a few voicemails. I excused myself to the officer in front of me and played the voicemails, and a terribly loud, angry voice echoed through the interrogation room.
How dare you deceive me like this? It's your fault my doghouse burned down. I'll make sure you take responsibility for this.
Hearing Doris's shouting voice from my smartphone speaker made me instinctively tense up, but the part about me deceiving her was something I couldn't ignore. When I immediately turned to face the police officer, he opened his notebook and explained matter-of-factly. According to Doris, the kerosene you gave her turned out to be gasoline, which caused the kerosene heater to ignite and start a fire.
I never gave Doris any kerosene or gasoline, neither one.
Even the officer's calm expression furrowed slightly as he stared at his notebook. If my story and Doris's didn't match up, the officer was probably thinking that one of us was lying. When the officer inquired about where I store my kerosene, I explained that I had recently changed the storage location and put gasoline canisters in the storage box instead.
I see, and why is that? About 3 months ago, I noticed an increase in kerosene consumption. Suspecting theft, I moved the kerosene to a locked shed and replaced it with gasoline in the storage box.
So someone was stealing the kerosene, and you put gasoline in its place, is that right? The officer looked at me intently, saying, I see. His gaze made me uncomfortable. As I thought about it more calmly, I began to realize that my actions were indeed strange. Regardless of who was stealing the kerosene, if there was gasoline where the kerosene used to be, they might mistakenly steal it. The containers for kerosene and gasoline are clearly different, but since only kerosene had been in the storage box before, I couldn't say for sure that they wouldn't mix them up.
Forgive me for asking, but did you suspect that Doris was stealing your kerosene? Is that why you put gasoline where the kerosene used to be? Were you hoping that some kind of problem would arise from this?
I couldn't help but look up at the officer's face. Although he had initially seemed genial and approachable, his eyes now gleamed with a sharp intensity as he sought to uncover the truth behind the incident. As I struggled to find the right words, I heard the sound of hurried footsteps approaching the room where we sat. The door burst open, and to my surprise, it was none other than Doris.
I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of talking to Connie right now,
the officer said, trying to maintain control of the situation.
You! Don't try to make excuses. I used the kerosene I got from your house, and it caused a fire. You didn't even answer your phone. I'll make sure you pay compensation in court,
Doris shouted, ignoring the officer's attempts to calm her down.
I never gave Doris any kerosene, and I had no idea that Doris was the one stealing the kerosene. Stealing? That's a terrible way to put it. I just got a little kerosene from my relative's house, so why should I be accused of stealing?
Doris folded her arms and raised her chin confidently in front of me.
Rather, I think suddenly putting gasoline where the kerosene was stored is a much more malicious and criminal act. Wouldn't you agree, officer?
The police officer pondered for a moment and began to say,
in cases like this, both parties might want to consider getting lawyers.
Doris made a blatantly unpleasant face at this suggestion.
Lawyers? That's just a waste of money. If she pays around $10,000 for the doghouse repairs and compensation in court, I don't intend to make a big deal out of this. What? $10,000? It's a good thing the neighbors helped rescue the dog, but I could have lost a family member if things had gone differently. It's only natural to expect that much in compensation, don't you think?
As Doris looked down at me with her arms crossed and snickered, the interrogation room door burst open once again.
Connie!
Finn appeared in the interrogation room, accompanied by another police officer. He was still in his suit, and for some reason, he was clutching the handheld game console Evan always played with. He must have run here. Finn was sweating on his forehead and catching his breath. After taking a moment to compose himself, he looked at the two police officers with a serious expression and said clearly, "My wife is innocent. Please, take a look at this." Finn inserted a memory card he had taken from the game console into a computer provided by the other officer. Dates were listed, and numerous photos and videos were displayed. Some of the photos were of poor quality and had clearly been taken with Evan's game console. They showed flowers blooming in the garden, the sky, and candid shots of me walking in the garden. Finn played one of the videos. There was no sound, and the footage was shaky as if it had been secretly filmed through a gap in the curtains, focusing on the storage box where the kerosene was kept. It was a bit dim outside, probably evening. At that time of day, I rarely left the kitchen due to dinner preparations and such, so I had no idea what Evan was doing. I had assumed he was just playing with his game console. But what was he filming? A figure appeared on the screen, looking around. The person was holding a small kerosene tank, opening the storage box and quickly transferring the contents into the tank they had brought. I couldn't help but let out a gasp. That person was undoubtedly Doris. Doris watched the screen, covering her mouth with her hand.
Wait a minute. Yes, I took the kerosene without permission. But we're family, aren't we? It shouldn't be a big deal. The real problem is that she put gasoline where the kerosene was supposed to be.
I see. So Doris was stealing it. However, the issue at hand is who is responsible for her mistakenly using the gasoline. Please look at this other video too. This is footage from a security camera I installed without my wife's knowledge 2 days before the doghouse caught fire, after hearing about the kerosene being stolen. This footage was clearer than the last. It seemed to be filmed from directly above the storage box. Doris, looking around cautiously, opened the storage box and unscrewed the cap of the gasoline canister. With practiced movements, she transferred the contents from the metal canister to a plastic tank.
Here! Look closely at this part.
Finn used the mouse to pause the video and zoomed in on the canister Doris was transferring the contents from, making it easier to see. The canister was clearly labeled "Caution, Gasoline" in large letters, making it immediately apparent at a glance. I can bring the actual canister if necessary, but the label is much clearer and larger than usual. By the way, I'm the one who made the label.
But I didn't accidentally use it.
The gasoline canister is made of metal and clearly labeled gasoline. Doesn't the responsibility lie with Doris, who stole someone else's property without permission and didn't bother to check?
Oh, I was just in a hurry. The containers for kerosene and gasoline are completely different. It's not a mistake people usually make. Doris, you use a canister to refuel your lawnmower at home, so don't tell me you didn't know. That excuse won't fly.
The police officer reviewed the video footage, nodded deeply, and bowed his head, saying,
"Thank you very much."
After seeing the video evidence, it was clear who was at fault, so the officer seemed to have nothing more to say. The rest was a family matter, so they took a brief statement about the disturbance and said we could go home. Thanks to Finn's level-headed actions, it was determined that the cause of the fire was Doris's own doing. However, as a family, we did reflect on the fact that it was wrong to leave the gasoline in a place where anyone could reach it and that it was not good to leave it unlocked. Regarding this incident, not only was Doris's lie exposed, but it also came to light that she had been stealing kerosene. The discussion even progressed to whether or not to file a police report, but Ellie desperately apologized to Finn and me. "I'm so sorry. Truly. I'm really sorry."
"You don't have to apologize so much. It's my fault."
The two of them were apologizing at the front door on Sunday morning. Perhaps seeing her mother desperately apologizing on her behalf stirred something in Doris. She stood next to Ellie with tears in her eyes and apologized to Finn and me. "Raise your head. Mom." "Doris." At Finn's gentle tone, Ellie and Doris looked up with slightly relieved expressions. "I don't care if you stole kerosene or whatever. This is a rural area, and people who steal are probably doing it because they're struggling financially. I can understand that." "That's right. It's hard to admit when you're having money troubles."
"But you were planning to blame Connie for mistaking the gasoline for kerosene, weren't you? Don't mess with me, you're a thief and fraud."
I was surprised to see him so angry, as he was usually calm and mild-mannered, and I instinctively tried to stop him. "That's enough. Doris is reflecting on her actions too."
"I'll never forgive her. Don't ever show your face in front of me again."
Doris tearfully turned to me and quietly said, "I'm sorry." I didn't miss the slight moisture in Finn's eyes as he watched the two of them continue to apologize. Finn wasn't truly angry, that's what I thought. Of course, he was furious that they had tried to make me out to be the culprit, but I don't think he was so enraged as to hurl such fierce insults. But he got angry for me. In front of Ellie and Doris, he spoke up for me when I couldn't say anything. When I thought about how he had gotten angry on my behalf, including the anger I should have felt, I found myself loving Finn, who was not used to getting angry, even more. Apparently, Doris had always enjoyed going to nightclubs, and to cover the costs, she had been shamelessly taking advantage of my home to save money. The kerosene incident made me realize it, but thinking back, Doris had often taken home my groceries and frequently helped herself to toilet paper, soap, and other household supplies. Some time after we stopped inviting Doris over, I checked the household accounts and was shocked to see how different the rate of consumption for these items was. My own obliviousness in not noticing this sooner, maybe that's what made Doris so brazen. I muttered self-deprecatingly as I looked over the account book. Finn, who had just gotten out of the shower, was drying his hair with a towel as he said, "Oblivious or not, the one who stole is in the wrong. But we do have some things to reflect on, like neglecting security because we thought there were no bad people in the countryside." After that, it seems the commotion caused by this incident led to so much trouble within Doris's family that it even ended in divorce. Still, she couldn't seem to give up going to nightclubs. She was living alone in an apartment, working desperately to earn money to keep up her hobby, so no one could really complain. Several months had passed since that disturbance, and our lives were starting to return to normal. As I was weeding in the garden, I noticed Evan looking at the scenery with a digital camera in hand.
"Mom, look at this."
I had always mistakenly thought that Evan was a kid who only played video games, but he had been playing with the camera function on his game console. When I bought him a digital camera, his interest shifted to photography. The small flowers blooming in the garden, the mountains and sky stretching out before us. Evan even started to focus on photo composition, and before long, he was saying,
"I want to be a professional photographer."
The kid who was always playing video games now wants to be a photographer.
I enjoyed video games for what they were. But now I enjoy taking photos too. I always want to do things that are fun.
Evan seemed to take pride in the fact that his actions had ultimately saved me. Again, he held out the camera screen to me, saying,
"Look, look!"
I felt frustrated, thinking that if I had listened to Evan's words sooner, I might have been able to prevent this whole fiasco. From now on, I want to have a serious talk with Finn about home security. The casual way we had been locking doors and windows until now became much more thorough after this incident. We shouldn't let our guard down just because it's the countryside or because it's peaceful.
I love it here. It's quiet and beautiful. Everyone is so nice. Even now, I can't imagine a burglary happening in a rural place like this.
Evan silently looked up at my face, still holding his digital camera.
That's exactly why, if we maintain a strong awareness of crime prevention and others follow our example, this town will become an even safer place, don't you think?
The moment I finished saying that, Evan snapped a photo of me with his digital camera. When I asked to see what kind of picture he had taken, it showed me with a strangely smug expression on my face. Well, that's fine. I'm just educating my son to be more security conscious. Mine and Evan's laughter echoed through the garden I loved so much.
This is the work of someone with a low level of education. It's no better than garbage.
Elizabeth shouted loudly while sneering at my documents. Because of her, I had worked overtime and desperately put this together, yet this was her attitude. It was truly unbelievable. As I furrowed my brow, the bootlicker, Marshall, sided with Elizabeth. She's always causing trouble, isn't she? Maybe she should start over from elementary school? Even my kid could write a report like this. With those words, Elizabeth tossed the pages of the report one by one into the air. No, more like kindergarten. But I guess it's too late for that. Marshall looked me up and down, laughing in a condescending manner. I don't want to work with these kinds of people anymore. I quit. Your feelings have been made perfectly clear. Huh? The moment I bowed my head and left the office, the faces of all the employees turned pale. I won't put up with this anymore. I'll make Elizabeth and Marshall regret this for sure. I'm Virginia Sanders. I turned 45 this year. I work as a tax accountant at Abrupt CPA firm. At this firm, we have a wide range of clients, from companies with annual revenues exceeding $10 million to small and medium-sized businesses with just a handful of employees. I originally worked in a different industry. I worked in customer service at a mid-sized cosmetics manufacturer. Then one day, I was transferred to the accounting department, and that's where I discovered my passion for accounting. Accounting work has great depth. You look at receipts and bank statements and journalize the accounting data, but even for similar products, the journalizing changes depending on the amount. Tax laws are also involved, so studying is essential. I was also independently studying to become a certified public tax accountant. However, the CPTA exam is extremely difficult. Given that only a few pass, even if you study, it's actually not easy to pass. Plus, it's tough to study after work. But somehow, I managed to study a little bit each day, and after several years, I passed the CPTA exam. To gain practical experience, I decided to change jobs and join Abrupt CPA firm. As one of the leading CPA firms in the country, Abrupt CPA firm has many new graduates joining. Most of them pass the required exams while in college and then enter our firm. So there were many people working as CPTAs in their 20s. And here I am, already in my 40s. When I first joined, I didn't have enough practical experience, so even though I passed the exams, I couldn't even register as a CPTA. Also, accounting and CPA work are completely different. In accounting, it was enough to just do the journalizing, but as a CPTA, you also need to prepare financial statements and various filings. Each one has strict submission deadlines, and mistakes are not tolerated. So I felt nervous with each and every task. There were many things I didn't understand, and I had to ask my colleagues who were more than 10 years younger than me questions over and over. Because of that, I was often treated coldly, but I somehow managed to catch up. And now, I'm registered as a CPTA and the number of clients I'm in charge of has increased. However, it hasn't been all smooth sailing. In the past, I made a big mistake that almost crushed my spirit. The person who helped me during that time was the director, Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson is 7 years older than me and a veteran with 30 years of experience in this field. She's also well-versed in tax law changes, and many colleagues rely on her. Thanks to Mrs. Henderson's support, I've been able to keep going. I'll continue to do my best under Mrs. Henderson. With that thought, I threw myself into work again today. But that determination of mine was cruelly shattered. Our firm gets incredibly busy from March to May. So every year around summer, personnel changes are made, and this time, it was decided that Mrs. Henderson would be transferred.
I'm going to be launching a new branch office. I'll be the branch manager there,
Mrs. Henderson told the other members and I. I currently belong to the Corporate Tax Division too. We mainly handle small and medium-sized business clients. Being a branch manager is a promotion at our firm. So while it's disheartening to lose Mrs. Henderson, all I can do is support her.
Congratulations, Mrs. Henderson.
When I said that, Mrs. Henderson smiled gently and told me,
"Thank you. The new director will be Mrs. Elizabeth Alexander from the Corporate Tax Division 1. She's close to you in age, so I'm sure you two will get along well."
Yes. The Corporate Tax Division 1 mainly handles large corporations and international companies. Mrs. Henderson was originally from the Corporate Tax Division 1 as well. Since it's on a different floor, we only have a chance to meet at the Christmas party. And at the Christmas party, we sit at different tables, so we didn't really get to know each other well. I've also heard rumors that the Corporate Tax Division 1 is made up of elites from prestigious universities. A new director coming from that department. I was feeling a bit anxious about what kind of person would be coming. And then, on the day the new director took office.
"Starting today, I will be the director of the Corporate Tax Division 2, Elizabeth Alexander. Until now, I was in the Corporate Tax Division 1, surrounded by highly competent individuals. I've heard that the Corporate Tax Division 2 is a gathering of failures. I will swiftly eliminate any useless personnel, so be prepared."
Elizabeth made an outrageous statement right from the start. Naturally, my colleagues in the Corporate Tax Division 2 were abuzz. And my colleagues also began introducing themselves to Elizabeth one by one. Among them were some who had transferred from the Corporate Tax Division 1 along with Elizabeth.
"I'm Marshall Carter. I've been assisting Mrs. Alexander until now, so I was transferred along with her this time."
He was still young at 38 years old. He had a refreshing and handsome appearance that seemed like it would be well received by female clients. When Marshall made his introduction, Elizabeth said with a smile,
"Mr. Carter mainly serves as my assistant. Just because he's capable, don't think about asking him for help."
With those words, she kept our colleagues in check. Marshall also made a face that showed he didn't entirely mind. From Marshall's demeanor, I realized it would be best not to get too involved with him. Now, for the next introduction. "Oh?" Elizabeth looked at me standing next to Marshall and tilted her head. "Is something the matter?" Elizabeth kept making strange faces, so I couldn't help but ask. Then Elizabeth laughed in a troubled way and said, "You're close to me in age, right? And yet you're just a regular employee. I was wondering how incompetent you must be." "What?" I was baffled by Elizabeth's exceedingly rude remark. My colleagues around me also kept their heads down, glancing at Elizabeth and me. Feeling uncomfortable, I somehow managed to squeeze out my words. I changed jobs and came here. So I haven't been with the company for very long. Well, whatever. If you're useless, I'll just fire you. Right, Mr. Carter? Elizabeth said that and talked to Marshall. There's nothing Mrs. Alexander can't do. Firing an old woman like this would be a piece of cake for her. Marshall responded happily to Elizabeth's question. I could only watch their exchange in silence. From then on, my work environment only got worse. As Elizabeth's assistant, Marshall checks the department's proposals, but he's especially hard on me. Mrs. Sanders. Don't submit such a basic tax-saving idea that anyone could come up with. Please propose something that would reduce taxes by over $10,000. You're embarrassing the abrupt CPA firm name. Saying that, he let out a big sigh and tossed the documents onto the desk. Even if you say that. I was puzzled by Marshall's comment. Because the tax-saving plan I proposed is a method recommended by our accounting firm. Tax-saving measures need to be done according to tax laws. Marshall should know that, yet he was making unreasonable demands. Anyway, I can't pass a proposal like this on to Mrs. Alexander. Here, redo it. After that, he acted as if his work was done and wouldn't even make eye contact with me. However, when another young female colleague brought a proposal, his attitude changed instantly. This is fantastic, isn't it? It's so different from someone's proposal. Let's send it to Mrs. Alexander for review right away. This female colleague always proposes the same tax-saving measures, so it should be the same content this time too. Still, Marshall showered her with praise every time. In the end, Marshall probably judges based only on the other person's youth and cuteness, not the content of the proposal. Elizabeth is much the same. She looks down on me just because I'm close to her in age. Even today, when I brought her a tax return to review, it was awful. Please take a look at this. The moment I said that, Elizabeth's face contorted. Is there a problem? Worried about Elizabeth's attitude, I asked, and Elizabeth let out a big sigh. What's with this paperclip? It's attached at an angle. What? I was baffled by Elizabeth's comment. Because that was something Marshall had pointed out. When Marshall checked the tax return earlier. Could you attach the paperclip at an angle? That's the rule when submitting to Mrs. Alexander, he said. Glancing at Marshall, I saw him giving me a mean smirk. Marshall had probably set it up so I would get scolded on purpose. That's what Mr. Carter said earlier. I tried to explain the reason, but the moment I mentioned Marshall's name, Elizabeth got angry. Don't make excuses, just reattach it straight. You really have no common sense. Elizabeth complained as she said that. After that, Elizabeth went on and on about how incompetent I was. My colleagues watched Elizabeth and me as if hiding. Mrs. Sanders is getting yelled at again. They were laughing as they said that. It made me feel truly miserable. After that, I had no choice but to endure Elizabeth's scolding. Then one day, Elizabeth placed several files in front of me. What are these? Though perplexed, I asked Elizabeth. Then Elizabeth laughed through her nose and said, These are files for clients with proposal appointments scheduled at the end of this month. I'm giving you work. Make proposals for all of them. I was stunned by Elizabeth's words. Lately, Elizabeth and Marshall have been pushing their work onto me for various reasons. At first, it was data entry and preparing tax returns. Gradually, it turned into researching answers to questions from clients, checking tax returns prepared by other colleagues, and being saddled with most of Elizabeth and the others' work. Because of that, my overtime hours kept increasing. My colleagues look at me and laugh. They probably find it amusing that Elizabeth and Marshall's attacks are focused solely on me. Poor thing, there's no way she can handle that much. My colleagues looked down on me with contempt. They watched me as if it were someone else's problem and laughed. Ignoring those colleagues, I looked at Elizabeth.
Proposals for all of these? And if it's the end of this month, that only leaves 1 week, right?
I asked Elizabeth in a panic. If it were my own clients, I could prepare a proposal in about a day per company. But this time, they were all Elizabeth's clients. Just understanding each company's situation would take at least 2 days. Plus, my job isn't limited to just making proposals. It ranges from daily bookkeeping and preparing tax returns for clients to responding to their questions. There was no way I could accept Elizabeth's instructions. Then, Elizabeth said something outrageous.
If you don't have enough time, just work overtime again. You're always working overtime to earn extra pay anyway.
You're so stupid. I'm graciously letting you help, so be grateful. Who does she think is responsible for my increased overtime? That's what I thought, but she is my boss. I bit my lip and endured it. And Marshall, who was next to Elizabeth, said something similar.
You're usually just a nuisance in the corporate tax division too. Can't you at least try to be useful?
Blamed by both Elizabeth and Marshall, my spirit finally broke.
I understand.
And so, I ended up having to prepare proposals for Elizabeth's clients. However, this was quite a challenge. When I opened the accounting data, I was appalled.
There's not a single entry for this period.
I hurriedly checked the client's filing cabinet, and there I found untouched accounting documents. Copies of bank statements and receipts were still in envelopes.
I can't prepare the materials unless I enter all of these.
Normally, when creating a proposal, you first enter all the accounting documents received from the client. This is to calculate the current profit and estimate the profit until the end of the period. I quickly checked the accounting data of the other clients Elizabeth pushed onto me, but none of them had been processed at all. What in the world had Elizabeth been doing this whole time?
I might not finish even if I work overtime.
My face turned pale as I muttered unintentionally. But I couldn't give up. After that, I worked frantically. I quickly took care of my own work and then made proposals for Elizabeth's clients. During lunch breaks, I worked while eating in an assembly line fashion. My colleagues saw me like that but didn't offer to help.
Even if you work that hard, you won't make it in time. Mrs. Sanders should just give up and go crying to Mrs. Alexander,
they said, laughing. No matter how hard I tried, there wasn't enough time, and because of overtime, I kept missing the last bus each day. The taxi fares have already added up to an insane amount, but it's all coming out of my own pocket. Good work. As I worked overtime on Elizabeth's proposals, Elizabeth and Marshall went home at the usual time as if it were only natural. And so, I managed to finish the proposals for Elizabeth's clients by the deadline.
Please review these.
Since they were Elizabeth's clients this time, I asked Elizabeth directly to review them. I was utterly exhausted both mentally and physically. Today, I thought I would go home right after regular hours and get a good night's sleep. However, upon looking at the proposals I had painstakingly prepared, Elizabeth said something outrageous the next moment.
This is the work of someone with a low level of education. It's no better than garbage.
Elizabeth shouted loudly while sneering at my documents. Because of her, I had worked overtime and desperately put this together, yet this was her attitude. It was truly unbelievable. As I furrowed my brow, the bootlicker, Marshall, sided with Elizabeth.
She's always causing trouble. Maybe she should start over from elementary school? Even my kid could write a report like this.
With those words, Elizabeth tossed the pages of the report one by one into the air. No, more like kindergarten. But I guess it's too late for that. Marshall looked me up and down, laughing in a condescending manner. I don't want to work with these kinds of people anymore. I thought about quitting right then and there. I quit. Your feelings have been made perfectly clear. Huh? You coward. Do as you please. The moment I bowed my head and left the office, the faces of all the employees turned pale. Especially my colleagues who had been watching me, their faces were visibly ashen. The one who had been doing Elizabeth and Marshall's work all this time was me. And I was the only one being harassed by the two of them. If I were gone, they were probably worried about the impact on themselves. As soon as I left the company, several of my colleagues chased after me.
Please don't go, Mrs. Sanders.
My colleagues tried to stop me, out of breath. I turned around and replied, "Why? I already said I'm quitting. Are you trying to stop me because it might affect you guys who are left behind?" Perhaps I hit the mark, as my colleagues' faces turned red. My colleagues were only looking out for themselves. I couldn't help but think they were truly self-centered. I laughed with a sigh and said, "Sorry, but I can't put up with those two anymore." Well, good luck starting tomorrow. With just that, I ignored my colleagues who had their heads down and left. I won't put up with this anymore. I'm sure starting tomorrow, everyone will have a tough time. Naturally, Elizabeth and Marshall will struggle more. After all, I had been doing their work for them all this time. I'll make Elizabeth and Marshall regret this for sure. And with that, I made a phone call to a certain person.
What's going on? Have you gotten used to the new director?
The person I called was Mrs. Henderson. She is currently the branch manager of a new office. I told Mrs. Henderson everything about Elizabeth and Marshall up to this point. I had no idea such terrible things were happening. Even Mrs. Henderson was stunned to hear about Elizabeth and the others' unbelievable behavior. Mrs. Henderson helped me so much, so I'm disappointed it turned out this way. Mrs. Henderson had been a huge help to me and had given me so much guidance to learn from. Even though she had carefully nurtured me, I felt apologetic. But Mrs. Henderson said with a laugh, "This is your decision, Mrs. Sanders. I won't oppose it. And I think you did well to persevere in that situation for so long." Mrs. Henderson. I was moved to tears by her words. I felt guilty about impulsively quitting the company due to Elizabeth's and the others' attitudes. However, hearing Mrs. Henderson say that made me feel that my judgment wasn't wrong.
Besides, it seems like Mrs. Sanders will end up coming back anyway.
Mrs. Henderson muttered. What? When I asked for clarification, Mrs. Henderson laughed, ha ha ha, and said, "It's nothing." Well then, I'll be in touch. And with that, she hung up the phone. I'm not sure what she meant, but I was relieved that I was able to properly bid farewell to Mrs. Henderson about my resignation. That's what I thought with relief. However, the situation took a major turn the next day. The following day, my mobile phone rang. The caller was a colleague. Even though they had rejected me like that yesterday. Calling so soon, do my colleagues have no pride? I answered the phone, half amazed. What is it, right on the heels of yesterday? I'm not coming back to the company. When I picked up, my colleague shouted in a pained voice. Please come to the office right away. We're getting non-stop calls from clients you were in charge of. The handover documents are in the company's shared folder. And there shouldn't be any filings for my clients anytime soon, right? There's no work I was saving up either, so I don't think there should be any issues. I replied curtly to my colleague. I always kept the handover documents updated. I had prepared them because I thought anything could happen with Elizabeth and the others' attitudes. Then my colleague spoke in a troubled manner.
That's not all. Actually, Mrs. Alexander and Mr. Carter are pushing their work onto us, too. So, the other members are also swamped.
Apparently, after I quit, my former clients frequently called. However, Elizabeth and Marshall refused to cover them. Even though they're the director and assistant, it's a blatant dereliction of duty. Not only that, but they're even pushing their own work onto others. They are clearly unfit as superiors.
So, what kind of inquiries are coming in?
I reluctantly asked about the content of the inquiries from the clients I used to be in charge of. The content was mostly tax law questions that could be answered even without being their representative. Half amazed, I conveyed the responses to the clients, and my colleague's tone changed.
You are truly amazing, after all. I think it would have been difficult for me to arrive at those answers. Won't you please come back to the company, even now? We really need you here, Mrs. Sanders.
My colleague seemed to have changed their opinion of me. However, even if my colleague's attitude changed now, I had no intention of returning.
I'm sorry. I have no intention of coming back.
I politely declined and hung up the phone. But after that, my colleagues kept calling incessantly. There was no end to it. There were so many that I just told them,
if there's anything, please contact me all at once by email. I'll properly respond then.
I didn't want to inconvenience my clients as much as possible. So I intended to do my best to assist them. Perhaps because I said that, the calls suddenly stopped completely. There were a lot of emails, but that couldn't be helped. As I was calmly checking my emails, another call came in. I had told my colleagues to use email, so who could it be? Looking at the caller ID, it was an unknown number. Even if I ignored it, they kept calling over and over. I was unsure, but I thought it might be some urgent contact. Determined, I decided to answer the phone.
Hello? Hey, Mrs. Sanders, what's the meaning of this? Not coming to the office.
The caller was Elizabeth. Though surprised by Elizabeth's call, I calmly replied.
I clearly told you I'm quitting, right? And I have sent my resignation letter to your email address afterwards.
Our workplace digitizes everything, and resignation letters are to be sent to supervisors electronically. Then Elizabeth shouted in a hysterical voice.
Shut up! Just come to the office right now. Otherwise, I won't accept your resignation.
Elizabeth said that and hung up. No choice.
Guess I'll go to the office.
There was a possibility that Elizabeth would arbitrarily crush the resignation letter I had sent. I should properly convey my intention to resign to the HR department. With no other choice, I headed to Abrupt CPA firm.
Excuse me.
I sighed as I showed up at the office. Immediately, my colleagues came running.
Mrs. Sanders, I knew you'd come back. There are some things I need you to take care of right away.
My colleagues called out to me happily. Another colleague looked like they were about to cry and said,
It's about the tax returns for Mrs. Alexander's clients, but they haven't been touched at all. Please, won't you help?
As I was surrounded by my colleagues, Elizabeth and Marshall appeared in front of me.
Finally showed up at the office? You're late, so there will be a penalty. You always cause trouble for those around you no matter what you do.
Elizabeth said that with a big sigh. Marshall's attitude was also quite imposing.
Get back to work quickly. And there's work I want to give to you.
And Marshall gestured with his chin for me to go to my desk. The moment I showed up at the office, this was their attitude. They probably hadn't reflected on their actions at all. I thought I needed to properly convey my thoughts.
I'm not returning to the corporate tax division 2 anymore.
What do you mean? Elizabeth was taken aback by my firm denial.
What do you mean you're not coming back? Do you understand what you're saying?
Marshall was also dumbfounded. I told the two of them with a resolute attitude.
Mrs. Alexander and Mr. Carter, you two have always pushed your own work onto me, right? And then you slack off and leave at the usual time. That's not all. You've always nitpicked at my work, haven't you?
Elizabeth laughed frivolously and said, "Subordinates exist to support their superior's work, don't they?
And it's only natural for a superior to point out if something isn't perfect. Or are you trying to talk back to me, your superior?"
And she maintained her high-handed attitude. Marshall also readily agreed, as if it were obvious.
Support. It's already beyond the scope of support. From bookkeeping for your clients to proposals and tax returns. Pushing everything onto me is too much. In the first place, what work do you even do for your clients?
When I asked, getting a bit emotional, Elizabeth and Marshall were at a loss for words. And after a long silence, they looked away and said,
"I at least visit clients."
Marshall also just looked down, feeling awkward. As I thought, Elizabeth and the others didn't do any behind-the-scenes work at all. I stared at Elizabeth intently.
"That's just for appearances, right? I make the materials and you use them to explain to clients. You make me research and answer all the questions you receive from clients."
My colleague stirred at my words.
"Mrs. Sanders even handles inquiries? So Mrs. Alexander and the others really just show their faces to clients. Mrs. Sanders is truly amazing,"
a colleague muttered. But their voice was too loud, I could hear it clearly. Elizabeth and Marshall seemed unable to refute my colleague's mutterings. They were looking down with red faces. At that moment,
"That's enough."
Surprisingly, Mrs. Henderson appeared.
"Mrs. Henderson? Why are you here?"
I was surprised by Mrs. Henderson's presence. Because she is now the branch manager of a new office. She doesn't have the free time to casually show up at the main office. As I looked puzzled, Mrs. Henderson answered with a guilty look.
"The branch is nearby. I got a call from another employee and rushed over in a hurry."
Mrs. Henderson shrugged her shoulders.
"Mrs. Henderson. Thank you."
She must have rushed over out of concern for me. Thinking that, I felt like I was about to cry. As I thought, my only ally was Mrs. Henderson. I felt that again.
"By the way, Mrs. Alexander. And you too, Mr. Carter. What's the meaning of pushing all the work onto your subordinate? Can you explain?"
Yelp! At Mrs. Henderson's glare, Elizabeth let out a strange voice, clearly terrified. There was no trace of her usual high-handed attitude towards me.
"That's..."
Elizabeth's face turned pale at Mrs. Henderson's appearance. And for good reason. Mrs. Henderson's position is higher than Elizabeth's. Plus, before becoming the director of the Corporate Tax Division 2, Mrs. Henderson was the director of the Corporate Tax Division 1. In other words, she's Elizabeth's former boss. So for Elizabeth, Mrs. Henderson is probably someone she can't defy. As proof, Elizabeth is shrinking back now. Seeing Elizabeth like that, Mrs. Henderson sighed and spoke.
"I heard everything from Mrs. Sanders. You pushed various things onto her because she's excellent. And yet, you nitpicked at every little thing, didn't you? Moreover, you're currently having an affair with Mr. Carter, right? Even though you're married, what do you think about that?" "What?"
I was surprised by the sudden revelation. Certainly, Elizabeth and Marshall are always together. But Elizabeth is married. so I never thought she had that kind of relationship with Marshall. Seeing my surprise, Mrs. Henderson spoke with a wry smile. Actually, there were rumors about these two since the corporate tax division won days. They're both adults, so I had been turning a blind eye until now. But now that it's come to this, they'll have to face the appropriate punishment. They've caused a lot of trouble to you after all. Hearing about punishment, Elizabeth became agitated.
What do you mean by punishment?
Her voice trembled slightly. Marshall's face also turned pale.
I was on the fast track to being an elite. What's going to happen to me?
He muttered in a low voice. Marshall was probably dating Elizabeth out of calculation. Judging from Marshall's attitude towards young female colleagues, he actually seemed to prefer younger women. But he must have chosen Elizabeth for the sake of his own success. Though it all seems to have been for nothing. Mrs. Henderson told the two of them,
If it were just an affair, I could have sent you each to a regional department and that would be the end of it. But this time, it's dereliction of duty and pushing all the work onto your subordinate, right? I wonder how the managing director will judge this. Maybe, worst, you'll be fired.
Mrs. Henderson spoke as if enjoying herself, laughing.
Fired? You're joking, right? That would be a real problem. I'll work hard from now on. Just please, anything but being fired.
Elizabeth started trembling upon hearing about being fired.
That's right. I'll break up with Mrs. Alexander, too. Please spare me from being fired.
Marshall clung to Mrs. Henderson. His face already looked like he was about to cry. Elizabeth and Marshall each desperately pleaded not to face a heavy punishment. However, Mrs. Henderson only gave vague responses. I don't know. I'm not the one involved. Why don't you go directly to the managing director instead of me?
The managing director is a cold-hearted person, right? They'll definitely cut us loose without hesitation. What should I do?
Elizabeth muttered, staring at one point with a troubled face. In the midst of that, Elizabeth's eyes met mine.
Ah, that's it.
Elizabeth approached me with a sickeningly sweet smile. And she started trying to persuade me. That's right. You say something too, Mrs. Sanders. Like, I want to work under Mrs. Alexander. I'll even withdraw my resignation. Right? Please. She pleaded with me, her eyes full of expectation. Marshall also approached me. Exactly. Prove that I've been doing my job properly. I'll even be with you if it comes down to it. So please convince the managing director. Marshall said, clinging on to me. Marshall's attitude of casually hinting at a romantic relationship made me shudder. It was simply gross. Mrs. Henderson also showed her discomfort. They're both quite desperate. However, I was determined to make these two thoroughly suffer in hell. Absolutely not. I'll tell the managing director everything that's happened until now. You two better be prepared.
No way.
Please have mercy. When I said that, Elizabeth and the others dropped their shoulders powerlessly. After that, Elizabeth and Marshall were fired from Abrupt CPA firm. I heard that this time, there were complaints to the representative not only from me but also from my colleagues. And apparently there were also complaints from clients. Elizabeth and Marshall had been pushing accounting and tax filing work onto me. Even when clients had questions, the two of them couldn't answer because they didn't understand the contents of the accounting. So I ended up having to research and provide answers. That's why it took time to respond, and clients were starting to feel suspicious. The managing director took the situation seriously, including that, which seems to have led to their dismissal. And according to rumors I heard, Elizabeth and her husband divorced. It seems her husband will also get custody of their children. Elizabeth's husband found out about her affair with Marshall due to this dismissal incident and was furious, demanding a divorce. I heard Elizabeth is currently being sued by her husband for compensation in the divorce. Of course, the same goes for her affair partner, Marshall. Both of them lost their income after being fired from the company. In that state, they are burdened with debt in the name of compensation. The professional world is small, and there are lateral connections in the industry. The reasons why Elizabeth and the others ended up resigning may also be circulating to some extent through rumors. So finding a new job will be exceedingly difficult. Elizabeth and Marshall are sure to struggle from now on. I think it serves them right. Since then, I returned to work at Abrupt CPA firm.
Good work. I look forward to working with you starting today.
We've been waiting for you. Mrs. Henderson greeted me with a smile. Actually, I ended up being transferred to the branch where Mrs. Henderson works. My former colleagues seem to want me to come back to the corporate tax division too, but I have no intention of returning to that place anymore. I'm sure my colleagues are now swamped with handling the clients Elizabeth and Marshall were in charge of and having a tough time. But I think it can't be helped. And since the branch is close by, I can continue to be in charge of the clients I was responsible for. That was appealing to me. Fortunately, my clients accepted my transfer without any issues. I think there will surely be various difficulties ahead. But even if I get discouraged, I want to stand up again no matter how many times it takes. In this branch, I have a boss I can respect. Mrs. Sanders. Come over here for a sec.
Yes. I'll be right there.
I will do my very best under Mrs. Henderson, so that I can shine even brighter.
I have no intention of taking Joe in. Just put him in some facility or something.
Emma, the ex-wife of my recently deceased husband, screamed this to the surrounding relatives, as I still couldn't grasp the reality of losing my husband to a heart attack. We had been married for just a month. The marriage that ended too soon left me with Joe, my husband's child from a previous relationship. Despite his biological mother's rare appearance, Joe never once looked up, remaining hunched over in his seat at the funeral home. Everyone seemed to show sympathy for Joe from a distance, but their attitudes shifted upon witnessing Emma's behavior.
It's inevitable, being the child of such a mother, that the child's blood is no good either.
Eventually, Mike's relatives started making selfish remarks.
Who's going to take Joe in? Your place, maybe? We definitely can't.
I slowly stood up and rushed to Joe's side, looking into his face.
Are you okay? Want to go to another room?
Hey, you don't need to care for me. I can just go to a facility or something. Feeling a tightness in my chest, before I could even think, I was hugging Joe. I could feel the cold stares of those around us. Then someone audibly remarked, which stirred my emotions.
Raising a dead husband's child is insane.
Stepping away from Joe, I clenched his hand and shouted at the relatives watching from a distance.
No matter what anyone says, I will raise this child properly.
My emphatic declaration was met with skepticism by everyone at the funeral home. Then, a petite man sitting in the funeral home chairs coughed softly before walking up to me and looked into my eyes. It was Tom, my dad, whom I hadn't seen in a long time.
Are you saying you'll raise that child all by yourself? Yes. I will make Mike's child something to be proud of. Don't be ridiculous.
Dad suddenly pulled Joe's arm towards him and stormed out of the funeral home. My name is Nancy. I lived with a man I met in college, thinking we would marry someday. On an ordinary day, not a special anniversary, he gave me something somewhat like a proposal. It wasn't particularly romantic, but I fondly remember the small, cute flower he gave me at that time. It was a small, star-shaped white flower that grew in a corner of a nearby parking lot. It was a star lily. I didn't rush into marriage immediately after the proposal, but after some time, I decided to go to the gynecologist alone. It was because when I told a friend I might marry my boyfriend, she had asked, "Aren't you going to get checked?" While I was sitting in the gynecologist's clean waiting room, I overheard a conversation. It was between a daughter in her 20s and her mother, discussing the daughter's upcoming marriage next month. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but the mother spoke loudly, mentioning her daughter was there for a bridal check. Receiving my boyfriend's proposal, I came here with the same thought, feeling a bit scared and shaky. What if the examination today reveals some disease? How should I explain it to him? I wanted to ask the chatting mother and daughter sitting next to me. "Hey, if you found a disease, would you still marry your loved one?" The warm sunlight through the window brightened the waiting room. As the parent and child who finished their consultation earlier left with smiles, it was my turn for the examination. When I left the hospital after the examination, the previously sunny sky had turned overcast, looking like it might rain at any moment. Weeks later, the examination results revealed that my body has difficulty conceiving children. Eventually, I broke up with that boyfriend. I didn't explain the reason to him. Or should I say, I didn't want to. I didn't want his sympathy, nor had I ever really wanted children. Avoiding the gaze of children in passing families, I had to tell myself I didn't like kids, or else I felt like I would sink into despair. Years later, I met Mike, a man from a business deal, and I fell for him. Despite deciding never to fall in love again, I found myself drawn to Mike's lonely expression. I asked Mike out. Sitting by the window of a cafe near my workplace, we might have been trying to figure each other out. Then, as if making up his mind, Mike straightened up and began to speak. "I'm actually divorced. I have a son and we live together."
I see. That's okay with me. And besides, I have difficulty conceiving.
"What? So I want to raise your child as my own." At this point, I had never met Mike's son. But I was determined to cherish him if he was my own. Mike smiled sadly for a moment before whispering in a soft, thin voice, "Thank you." And that's how our relationship began. Emma, Mike's ex-wife, apparently abandoned her household and childcare duties and left the home. It's unclear if that was the direct cause, but Joe, their son, must have felt lonely. Despite being only 10 years old, he would hang out with older friends near the station late into the night. Mike's job kept him busy, often returning home late, leaving little time to connect with Joe. Soon after we started dating, I asked for an opportunity to meet Joe, and sincerely told him that I was seriously considering marriage with Mike. I then decided to visit their home daily, preparing meals and spending time with Joe. I cooked kid-friendly dishes like pizza, chicken nuggets, and pasta, making sure he ate plenty. Initially hesitant, Joe began to open up and show his genuine, childlike side. "Joe, do you like tonight's dinner?" "Yeah, it's delicious." I wanted to stop Joe from wandering out at night, so I would finish my work early and always come by in the evening to cook. That alone made Mike deeply grateful, and a year into our relationship, we decided to get married. Legally becoming Joe's parent filled me with happiness. We didn't report our marriage to my parents. Mike's parents had already passed away. It wasn't that I had a bad relationship with my parents or any special circumstances, I just hadn't seen them for many years. I was raised by my father after losing my mother at a young age. "I'd like to meet Grandpa someday," Joe said, so smiling, and to that, with little hesitation, I nodded. After getting married, I tried harder than ever to cook for Joe and do as much motherly things as possible. But I had no motherly role model. My father was always busy with work, and I don't have many memories of being doted on. Young women, who seemed to be employees at my father's glass factory, would come to keep me company and cook for me in turns. The sound of glass clinking, echoing from the nearby factory until night, still lingers in my ears. When I went to see my father at the factory wanting to see him, I was scolded severely. So, I hid in the shadows and watched him from a distance. From afar, I watched my father staring at the molten glass in the dark factory. There was a very small flower bed in the corner of the factory, where white star-shaped flowers bloomed. I remember vividly picking one of those white flowers and waiting at home alone. As I waited for Mike's return, confirming Joe had fallen asleep, the thought of my father suddenly crossed my mind. I should visit my father. I want to introduce Mike and Joe to him. I was curious about his reaction. As I was about to look up my father's contact on my mobile phone, an unknown number called. I answered the phone. It was cold. The voice of a woman I didn't know, the content, the air, everything felt cold. It was the news that Mike had suddenly collapsed at work and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. I wanted to rush there, but hesitated because Joe was sleeping. And that hesitation is something I would regret for the rest of my life. An hour after being taken to the hospital, I was informed that Mike had passed away. The doctor later explained it seemed to be a heart attack. The cause of death didn't matter to me. What I wanted to know was not why Mike died, but how Joe and I were supposed to live without him. I didn't cry even after Mike died. It was too sudden, and it didn't feel real. Without much thought, I blandly discussed funeral arrangements with the funeral home the hospital referred, and the proceedings went on mechanically. Joe, like me, probably couldn't grasp the reality. Sitting in the funeral home chair with the same expression as always, I looked boredly at the floor. A flamboyantly dressed woman appeared, and Mike's relatives started to argue with her after she approached them. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but she was Emma, Mike's divorced ex-wife, seemingly pressing about an inheritance or the lack thereof. Desperately, the relatives explained. "There's nothing like that." Amidst this, it felt like someone had asked what would become of Joe. Emma yelling caused quite a scene at the funeral. "I have no intention of taking Joe in. Just put him in some facility or something. Can't you see he's the one who's hurt the most? Can you not speak so thoughtlessly? Oh, are you Mike's new wife? I heard about you. He died shortly after getting remarried, right? What are you going to do in this situation? You have no connection to Joe at all. You can't possibly feel a bond after just 1 month of being a parent and child, can you?" As I continued to glare silently, Emma shrugged and smirked. "You seem young. You'd better make a choice you won't regret." With those parting words, she left the funeral home. Despite his real mother making an appearance for the first time in a while, Joe never once looked up. Everyone seemed to show sympathy for Joe, but their attitudes changed after witnessing the ex-wife's behavior. It's clear, being the child of such a mother, that child is beyond help too. Whispers began circulating that it's impossible to fight blood and how there's no obligation to raise a child not related by blood. Eventually, Mike's relatives started making selfish remarks. "Who's going to take Joe in? Your place, maybe? We definitely can't. Are you okay? Want to go to another room? Hey, you don't need to care for me. I can just go to a facility or something." Feeling a tightness in my chest, before I could even think, I was hugging Joe. I could feel the cold stares from those around us. Someone said loud enough for me to hear. "Raising a dead husband's child, are you out of your mind?" That's when my emotions surged. Stepping away from Joe, I clenched his hand and shouted at the relatives watching from a distance. "No matter what anyone says, I will raise this child properly. Calm down a bit. You have no obligation to do this. Honestly, it would be better for your future to just put him in a facility." "Shut up. Even if I'm alone, I'll make sure to raise him right." My defiant declaration was met with skepticism by everyone at the funeral home. What would become of Joe's life if I also disappeared from his side now that Mike was gone? I won't let him be lonely like I was as a child. I refused to let that happen. Then, a petite man sitting in the funeral home chairs coughed softly before walking up to me and looked intently into my eyes. It was Tom, my dad, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. "Are you saying you'll raise that child by yourself?" "Yes. I will make something of Mike's child.
Don't joke. You have no idea how hard that's going to be.
Dad suddenly pulled Joe's arm towards him and stormed out of the funeral home. Ignoring the other relatives' stunned reactions, we faced each other in the parking lot just outside. I followed and tried to pull Joe away from my father, but was pushed back with a strength that belied his small stature.
Your name's Joe, right? I'm your grandfather. What? Yeah. How about it? You'd have to move, but would you come live with me? There's a factory near my house where I work. It's a bit noisy.
As Joe struggled to respond to the sudden invitation, Dad turned to me with a sad look and said,
Nancy, come home.
He suggested it would be sad and difficult for a child to be raised by just a woman, and that I should come back to my family home. After the funeral, the relatives stopped bothering me with unnecessary comments. It was as if they no longer wanted to be involved with Joe and I. I had been determined to raise Joe on my own, but it was just bravado. I was actually scared, anxious, and wanted to disappear. Joe hadn't cried since Mike passed away. And I hadn't yet felt the reality of his death, nor had I felt truly sad. But when Dad reached out to me with a look of concern, something inside me broke free, and I found myself crying in my dad's arms like a child. Are you okay? I felt Joe watching me as I continued to cry. After that, Joe and I vacated our apartment and left home. Dad came to pick us up, and we headed to my childhood home in his car. The scenery passing by the car window seemed melancholic, making me feel as if the memories I had with Mike were drifting further away. Upon returning home, a new life for Joe and I began. From his first day at the new school, something was off about Joe. I casually encouraged him, saying it's not easy to make friends right away, and sent him off to school as usual the next day. I started helping out at the glass factory my father ran. Inside the factory, a few male craftsmen were blowing glass to make dishes. My job was to inspect the finished glass products, picking up each item one by one and wiping it down with a cloth. I felt deeply moved, now as an adult doing the very work I was scolded for watching from a distance as a child because it was dangerous. Among the employees, there was a veteran lady who used to take care of me, and she happily remarked how the once little Nancy was all grown up. Though Dad no longer manufactures glass as an active craftsman, he was chatting with what seemed like a salesperson at a small desk near the workshop. I occasionally watched the glass blowing process from the corner of my eye while doing my job. The sight of the molten glass glowing orange in the furnace, being gathered on the end of a long rod and blown into a balloon-like shape, was nothing short of magnificent. I felt a slight desire to try it myself. But there was no atmosphere for beginners to experience glass blowing in this factory. The craftsmen worked silently, fluidly forming glass. Realizing that my father was the one leading these skilled craftsmen filled me with a bit of pride. At that time, I believe I was doing my best to adapt to this unfamiliar new life. And Joe probably was too. At a school PTA meeting, a nosy parent told me about Joe's situation at school. It seemed that the fact Joe and I were not blood related had already become a neighborhood rumor, and many students at his school were talking behind his back. Hearing this left me with a heavy heart as I started to walk, filled with various thoughts. I had been completely unaware of this, unable to even imagine it. It was something I should have considered, yet it had never crossed my mind. Mostly, I was overrun with regrets, excuses, a desire to escape, and the strong wish that Mike was still here with me. Returning home, I walked down the hallway and knocked on Joe's room door.
Joe, can I come in?
Don't open it. Joe's somewhat hoarse voice came through. After taking a breath, I quietly said, I'm sorry.
Joe, if you're okay with it, could you tell me about what's happening at school?
Joe didn't respond. I stood in front of the door for a while before eventually giving up and starting to prepare dinner. Day by day, conversations with Joe dwindled. Perhaps he sensed my forced smiles as I tried to inquire about school. He stopped sharing anything about his daily life. Eventually, Joe stopped going to school and began shutting himself in his room, living like a recluse. Though he was supposed to be at school in the mornings, It seemed he returned home after I left for work. Even at work, where I needed to concentrate, I found myself thinking about Joe, leading to mistakes like dropping freshly made glassware and getting scolded. Dad noticed my distress and offered to talk with me. However, I felt unable to share my troubles with my father, who had left me to focus on his work during my childhood. Yet, Dad kept calling me after work. "Talk to me if something's wrong," he would repeatedly say. Despite his insistence, I couldn't bring myself to confide in Dad. Each time he said to talk to him if something happened, it felt as though he was reminding me to protect Joe, leading me to ponder every night until I came up with an idea. One morning, I quietly handed Joe a mobile phone while he was eating breakfast. Seeing his suddenly brightened expression, I smiled a little. "I bought a mobile phone, matching with mine. If it's hard to talk about school stuff, you can text me. I might be able to help." "Okay." Joe carefully cradled the new mobile phone placed on the table with both hands. For a while, there was no contact from Joe. Considering I hadn't had time to teach him how to use the mobile phone, it seemed natural, until one day, I suddenly received a message. It was written that he had learned how to use the mobile phone from a kind employee at the glass factory, so he decided to send a message. Gradually, though sparingly, he began to share things about school through messages. As a mother, I wanted to do everything I could, but even after hearing about his school life, there wasn't much I could do to help, except to send encouraging words through messages. Still, I wondered if that had made Joe happy. After getting the mobile phone, he started going to school regularly and began to lead a normal school life. Even as a middle schooler, he went to school diligently without causing any major problems, and eventually became a high school student. By this time, Joe had stopped needing to communicate through messages and would talk to me face to face about his day at school, impressing me with his candidness. One holiday, Dad took Joe for a tour inside the glass factory. It was near the high-temperature furnace used for forming glass, an area I had been constantly warned as a child to stay away from because it was dangerous. Watching Joe being carefully taught and experiencing making a basic glass cup filled me with immense joy. From that day on, Dad spent his weekends and days off teaching Joe how to make glass. Dad's glasswork was artistic. It gave a special sensation, almost as if holding the drink directly. Time passed and Joe was in his junior year in high school. He wasn't interested in going to college, nor was he enthusiastic about getting a job, struggling to decide on a career path. The pressure from teachers and the inability to choose a post-graduation path until winter might have been partly my fault as his parent. During weekends, while I was busy with paperwork in a corner of the factory, Joe and Dad would take breaks together, sitting and staring at the heated glass furnace. Does it make sense to do manual work in an era when most factories are transitioning to machines for glass production? Joe asked Dad out of curiosity, to which Dad responded with a thoughtful look, crossing his arms. During his adolescence, it's unclear how Joe viewed Dad as a craftsman, but Dad seemed to ponder deeply over Joe's words. "People say our job is a dying industry. But we're still making a living out of it, which means there's value in it. There are people who appreciate the glass I make. Aren't you scared of going bankrupt?" "I'm terrified, to be honest. Bankruptcy is scary." I brought over cups of coffee to them, using the glass cups Joe had made as practice. Dad looked at Joe's glass and sipped his coffee, showing a hint of sadness. "When machines started taking over the glass industry, I was young. Nancy was little, and I didn't have time to play with her. Every day was filled with fear and no room for relaxation. I was desperate not to lose my mind from all the work. I wonder if Mom was lonely too. Probably. I hardly took care of Nancy. The thought that she had only me, her only family, scared me to death." Dad looked around the factory. "I lost my wife shortly after starting this company. But I didn't have the luxury to mourn. I needed money to raise Nancy. I had to keep the company going to support my employees. I was desperate not to make my beloved daughter sad. Dad. Pathetic, right? I was just a man who could only think of himself. Hesitantly, I reached out and touched Dad's hand. His hands were thin but large with long fingers. Hands that had crafted countless glasses. I knelt before Dad, eventually wrapping both hands around his. Something resonated within me. As if something was speaking to my heart. Thank you, Dad, for raising me. Didn't you listen? I didn't do anything. I was just desperately afraid of becoming hopeless. No, I knew you were. I knew Dad was working hard for me. I used to watch my father work hard from outside the factory, always finding ways to pass the time at the factory entrance. The handmade flower bed that changed with the seasons had been planted by someone. Then one day, when I was still young, one of my employees taught me who had been making these flower beds. I was told it was Dad who planted them. There was no way Dad could be interested in flowers. Surely, it was planted for me, thinking all girls like flowers. Now, no more flowers were planted there. When the star lilies that had sprouted from seeds carried by the wind bloomed around the factory, Joe graduated high school and started working at Dad's glass factory. Dad, who had been focusing more on paperwork, began working with glass again. The intricate glass works he created was purely magnificent, and both Joe and I respected him for it. As time passed, Joe married a woman introduced by Dad and built a duplex house. Insisting we live together despite my initial refusal. Dad was also invited to live with us, but he refused. I can't sleep unless I'm near the workshop. Eventually, when my grandchild was born and Joe was busy with work, I took care of the baby. Walking with the baby, I pointed out Joe working in the factory. Look, there's Dad. I tilt my grandson's face slightly to look at Joe. Without saying a word, the baby suddenly pointed at a small star lily at our feet. The delicate star-shaped flowers scattered around the factory, and as I set the baby down, it happily played with the flowers. What are you doing? That's dangerous. Joe came out of the factory, scolding yet looking at his child with joy. I hope to protect this small life that lies beyond this smile forever. What happened? Are you okay? I stopped by my son and his wife's house to check on my 3-year-old grandchild. What I saw was my grandchild chained up in the room, looking lethargic and semi-conscious. How terrible. Furious, I called the police, and they arrived in less than 5 minutes. However, I was the one put in handcuffs by the officer who said, "You're under arrest." There must be some mistake. I'm the one who called. Despite my protests, they wouldn't listen and took me away in a police car. However, I later managed to turn the tables due to certain events. And I vowed to seek revenge against the person who did such a horrible thing to my grandchild. I'm Colette, 63 years old. I've been living alone since my husband passed away 3 years ago. My son, Tyrone, married Lizzie 5 years ago, and they lived an hour's drive away from our house. About half a year ago, Tyrone started working away from home, and I hadn't seen my granddaughter Monica since then. Wondering how they were doing, I messaged Lizzie, and she replied the next day. Monica has been wanting to see you. Why don't you come over? I was having tea with a friend near my son's house and replied, I'll be there in about an hour, looking forward to it and buying a gift for my grandchild. But when I arrived at my son's house at the agreed time, there was no response to the doorbell. Curious, I tried the doorknob, and it was unlocked. Lizzie, are you there? I'm coming in. I entered hesitantly and found my granddaughter Monica chained up. Monica! Monica! What happened? Are you okay? I rushed over and called out to her, but Monica was lethargic and semi-conscious. Moreover, she had lost a lot of weight and had multiple bruises on her skin visible through her tattered clothes. This is terrible! I need to call the police. I immediately called the police and arranged for an ambulance as well. To my surprise, the police arrived in less than 5 minutes. As I was surprised by their quick response, I was told you're under arrest and suddenly arrested.
Wait a minute, please. There must be some mistake. I was the one who called.
However, the police said they received a call 10 minutes ago about a mother-in-law making a small child suffer. Who would do such a thing? As I was about to be put into the police car, confused, I saw Lizzie peeking out from behind a utility pole, watching us. And when the paramedics arrived, she suddenly rushed out in a panic.
Monica! What happened? Oh, Lizzie! Can't you prove I'm innocent? Don't be silly. Officer, this person here is the one who did such terrible things to Monica. What are you talking about? I live far away. It's impossible for me to do such a thing.
Lizzie glared at me with sharp eyes, claiming she had been hospitalized due to illness and had left Monica in my care during that time. Lizzie was the one who invited me over. What's going on? Stunned, I was led to the police car, and the ambulance carrying Monica and Lizzie drove off ahead of me. Later, I was placed in a bleak room at the police station and questioned.
Everything Lizzie said was a lie. I don't even understand why I was treated as the culprit.
I asked them to check my mobile phone screen for the message exchange with Lizzie. However, all her replies had been deleted. It seemed Lizzie had deleted the messages she sent to me. Was Lizzie the one who harmed Monica and called the police? That thought crossed my mind, but I had no proof and decided it was best not to speculate. For the time being, I showed them the receipt for the gift I bought for my grandchild, continuing to plead my innocence. But the police didn't believe me. After being released due to insufficient evidence, I went home and called Tyrone. Mom, what's up all of a sudden? Oh, just wondering how you are. I miss seeing Monica. Oh, Monica is full of energy, I hear from Lizzie every day. My son didn't sound like he was lying, which puzzled me, but if I hung up now, I wouldn't be able to protect Monica in the future. I quickly searched for what to say next. Oh, I heard Lizzie was hospitalized because she was feeling unwell? I don't think that's true. She didn't even seem to have a cold. Tyrone was vague even though he was talking about his own wife. Suspecting he was hiding something, I asked if something had happened. Tyrone was silent for a while, then let out a deep sigh. I guess I can't hide it from you, Mom. Actually, we're getting a divorce. What? Why? The classic irreconcilable differences. We've been fighting nonstop since I started working away from home. I was shocked by his unexpected response, and when I heard that Lizzie would get custody of Monica after the divorce, I couldn't help but raise my voice. That's unacceptable. Absolutely not. I know it's sad, like losing a grandchild, but it's best for children to be with their mother. No, you need to listen to me. I then decided to tell Tyrone everything that happened today. When I told him I was treated as a suspect and taken away by the police, he was shocked and muttered, "What's going on?" It seemed Tyrone was completely unaware of the situation. I thought it might be best to share my concerns. I'm so worried about Monica. I don't want to think this way, but I'm afraid Lizzie might be doing something. Which hospital was Monica taken to? The paramedics told me. I think I'll go check. Unable to hold back any longer while talking to Tyrone, I hung up and immediately jumped into my car. An hour later, I arrived at the hospital and, wearing a large mask to conceal my face, I blended in with the waiting patients and looked around for Monica and Lizzie. I can't find Monica. What should I do? Despite coming this far, I felt helpless and decided to get some fresh air in the backyard, where I heard a familiar voice. There, I saw Lizzie and a doctor speaking quite intimately. It's hilarious how easily the police were fooled by me. I was the one who chained up Monica and didn't feed her. They think the mother-in-law is the culprit, so she won't be getting out of detention for a while. Hearing Lizzie had called the police confirmed my worst fears, and I felt a wave of darkness wash over me. Then, I became furious upon hearing a certain plan she mentioned next. Not today. To avoid suspicion, let's execute the plan in 2 or 3 days. Lizzie's face was colder than I'd ever seen, sending chills down my spine. However, overhearing their conversation allowed me to understand the reasons behind Lizzie's mysterious actions. There's no time to think this over. Determined to protect Monica at all costs, I quickly began to prepare. The next day, I waited in the backyard where Lizzie and the doctor had their secret meeting. Based on their conversation the day before, they always met here to talk. Hiding behind a large tree, they arrived just as I expected.
How could Monica regain consciousness? At this rate, it'll be revealed that I'm the one who weakened her. Do something before she gets better.
Lizzie was excitedly shouting dangerous things at the top of her lungs. Gently patting her shoulder, the man nodded and said, "Leave it to me.
If you succeed, I'll give you half of Monica's life insurance money. Make sure she's dead. After the mother-in-law is in prison, I'll share the property with you too."
I clenched my fists, unable to stand the detestable Lizzie. My anger reached its peak, and I couldn't hold back any longer.
I'd like to hear more about what you just said. What? Colette. Why are you here? I was released due to lack of evidence. Too bad for you.
Lizzie, looking awkward, approached me as if nothing had happened. I'm so relieved. I was worried about you.
What are you talking about? You're the one who called the police.
There's no way that. Before Lizzie could finish, I played the video I had recorded on my mobile phone from their conversation yesterday. The video revealed all their schemes. Lizzie's face went pale upon hearing it.
Not only did you treat Monica horribly, but you also tried to pin the blame on me and take my property after I was sent to prison. You two are devils.
Actually, the doctor conspiring with her was Monica's ex-boyfriend. After sending their photo to Tyrone, he told me he recognized the man.
Doctor, how much did you rack up in gambling debts to be so desperate for money? How did you know that?
This was also something I heard from my son. The gambling debts were the reason Lizzie and the man broke up during their relationship. Convinced they were repeating the same mistakes, I coaxed the truth out of them, and it seemed my suspicions were correct. I borrowed $80,000 from Consumer Finance. That's it. If you want to help Monica, Colette, could you pay off the debt instead?
You really are something. If we're going to talk about this, let's do it in Monica's hospital room.
Agreeing, Lizzie, the doctor, and I headed to Monica's hospital room. Reunited with Monica, who was lying in the hospital bed, I rushed to her side, overwhelmed with joy. Monica. Monica. It's Grandma. Do you recognize me? Yeah. Grandma. I was scared. Monica, holding my hand and hugging me, looked so pitiful. How terrified she must have been. It's all right now. I'll protect you no matter what. As I gently hugged her and stroked her head, I heard a noise and turned around to see Lizzie locking the door to the hospital room. Oh, what a touching scene. Maybe I should join in, just kidding. Lizzie approached with a sleazy smile, then snatched my mobile phone from my hand and smashed it on the floor. She then took out the SD card, breaking it in half. Evidence destruction complete. This is the end for you, Colette.
It's sad to say goodbye, but you'll be joining your husband. What? It's more profitable to take all of your assets than to have you pay off the debt.
Lizzie pinned me down in shock, and the doctor, with a sleazy grin, took a syringe out of his pocket. Indeed, this was the terrifying plan I had overheard in the hospital's backyard. Good thing I prepared. Guess we'll start with the elderly rather than the child, he said, approaching me.
Get your hands off Mom!
Tyrone emerged from under the bed with his smartphone in hand, surprising Lizzie and the doctor.
Why are you here? I got a call from Mom. I've heard everything. You deliberately called us to this room.
Lizzie glared at me bitterly.
By the way, you smashed the SD card, but I have another backup.
Oh, and Tyrone is currently recording this exchange on his mobile phone. Tyrone stood in front of us to protect me and Monica. Lizzie, despite her pale face, seemed not to have given up yet.
Then we'll have to take care of all three of you. Come on, don't just stand there.
Pushed by Lizzie, the sweating doctor slowly approached Tyrone. At that moment, a female voice asked, "What's the matter?" I had secretly pressed the nurse call button, summoning a nurse.
It's an emergency. Bring the keys and security. We'll be killed if you don't hurry.
What? The nurse exclaimed loudly. They seemed to be making a phone call, forgetting to hang up the nurse call. The panicked doctor tried to leave the room but couldn't walk well due to trembling knees.
Please hurry and help us.
As I shouted louder, the door unlocked and security guards and nurses rushed into the room. After quickly explaining the situation, security detained Lizzie and the doctor.
He tried to attack me with that syringe in his pocket. Please check its contents.
The security confiscated the syringe with suspicious liquid, and the doctor tried to deflect blame, saying, "It's not my fault. She seduced me into it."
The evidence on the video will show who's at fault.
Let the police decide.
Lizzie, there's no need for discussion. We're getting a divorce. I'll take care of Monica. Wait! Don't abandon me! I'll break up with my ex-boyfriend. Please forgive me.
She clung to Tyrone with tears streaming down her face, but Tyrone shook her off. Then, she turned to me and offered a profound apology.
Colette, please stop the police. I won't do anything like this again. You should be grateful you can still eat, even if it's bad food. Experience a bit of the hardship Monica endured, being chained and starved. Look, your ride is here.
Outside the room, the police cars called by the nurses had arrived. I handed over the SD card with the video and the data from Tyrone's mobile phone to the police, and the crestfallen Lizzie and the doctor were taken away. Subsequently, Lizzie and the doctor were imprisoned for conspiring to take Monica's life and for framing me, putting me in danger. Tyrone divorced Lizzie and gained custody of Monica, claiming $30,000 in damages for Monica's emotional distress and for the affair, which he also demanded from the doctor. It was decided that I would take care of Monica for a while. Monica recovered quite well and happily runs around the garden now. We're all looking forward to living together once Tyrone's work assignment ends.
It's better not to go home even after you're discharged.
My 5-year-old daughter, who came to visit me in the hospital, muttered this. I couldn't understand what she was saying and tilted my head in confusion.
Then look at this.
I couldn't stop trembling when I saw the photo that my daughter, who possesses a mysterious power, handed to me. That's because it captured something unbelievable. In that moment, everything came crashing down. And at the same time, a brilliant revenge drama was about to begin. My name is Cheryl. I'm 32 years old. I lived with my husband Marty, who is 3 years older than me, and our 5-year-old daughter. I worked at the same company as Marty and was drawn to his cheerful personality. I thought about quitting when I got pregnant, but after discussing with HR, I changed my mind and returned to work in a different department after maternity leave. Since we were both working, we shared household chores and took care of our daughter together. Our daughter Erica was innocent and cheerful, and she loved her daycare. Erica, who had always been a great helper, took the initiative to help when we were sorting out my parents' house after they passed away 2 years ago. But at that time, Erica was still just a little girl. When she found my dad's Polaroid camera, she became obsessed with it and couldn't focus on anything else. Marty, who was there, said, "Miss Photographer, could you take a picture of me?" Erica got into the spirit and cheerfully said, "Say, cheese." Both of them put off helping, but to me, it was a happy scene. I also have an older sister who is 3 years older than me, and she was a good listener. I confided everything to her, including how I met Marty. Since her daughter was the same age as mine, we visited each other's homes and had a close family relationship. However, things started to change after I turned 30. Marty started coming home late citing work reasons, and he completely stopped helping with household chores. He would go out on weekends, and seeing my daughter look lonely, I pointed this out to Marty one day. Then he yelled, Why the hell do I, a man, have to do cleaning and stuff? Let me do what I want at least on my days off. Since then, our conversations became less frequent, and our marital relationship wasn't good. Yet, when my sister Chloe came over, Marty's attitude changed completely. "Chloe, welcome. Please stay over tonight." As we saw each other more often, it seemed Marty and Chloe had become close without me knowing, always engrossed in their conversations even when I was around. Around the same time, I was filled with anxiety. One day, when I tried to ride my bicycle, I found the brakes were broken. There are many roads around our house, and it could have led to a serious accident if I hadn't noticed. On another day, it seemed like disasters were just waiting to happen, like the screws on the ladder being loose. Should I talk to Marty about this? But Marty was so distant lately, heading straight to bed as soon as he got home, making it impossible to talk to him about anything. Phew, that was close. But I'm glad I was safe again this time. Actually, there was a secret reason why I had survived numerous life-threatening situations. Amidst these dangerous incidents, my daughter went to stay overnight at my sister's house by herself. As a result, it was just Marty and me, alone as a couple. Feeling uneasy, I busied myself with cleaning, something I usually wouldn't do. Then, Marty slowly approached me. "Since it's just the two of us, how about we go see the night view? You know, the place we used to go to when we were dating." "Eh?" So suddenly. "What's going on?" "Actually, I've been cold to you because I've been busy with work." "I'm sorry." "So, I want to go back to the beginning and repair our relationship." Saying that, Marty hugged me. It was a small hill about a 10-minute drive from our house. It was a hidden spot with a panoramic view of the cityscape, where hardly anyone was around. It was also the place where he asked me out, making it a special memory for me. Marty still cares about me. I'm so relieved. Overwhelmed and teary with happiness, I decided to go see the night view with Marty. After getting ready quickly, I was about to step out of the house. Then, Marty said, "I can't let a lady carry the luggage," and took my bag for me. His gentlemanly behavior made me happy. But little did I know, this action would lead to a tragedy later on. When we arrived at the spot, the attentive care I had just received was no more. Marty said, "I'll go ahead and find the best spot to see the night view," and disappeared into the dark with just a flashlight.
"Ah, wait! Don't leave me behind!"
I wanted to hurry, but it was pitch dark, and I couldn't see anything. I tried to use my cell phone to light up the area, but I had entrusted my bag with the phone in it to Marty. The ground was uneven, and I had to walk carefully step by step to avoid tripping. Suddenly, I felt like someone pushed me, and I lost my balance and fell off a cliff. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed.
"I was wondering why I couldn't find you when an ambulance came and there was a big commotion. I got closer and saw you being carried on a stretcher. I was scared to death."
Marty held my hand with tears in his eyes. The nurse said someone happened to pass by and found me lying at the bottom of the cliff, and they called for help. And for some reason, Chloe was there too and came with me in the ambulance. Chloe helped with the hospital arrangements, and she said she'd take care of Erica at her house until you're discharged. Ah. I see. Chloe. Fortunately, there was no serious harm to my life, and I was able to go home 3 days later. And on the day before my discharge, Erica came to visit me, but she seemed anxious. "I'm sorry for worrying you, but I'll be back home tomorrow." I tried to reassure Erica with a cheerful tone, but her expression remained tense. Then, as if making up her mind, Erica nodded and said something shocking. "It's better not to go home even after you're discharged." "Why?" "Mom is all better now, as you can see." I didn't understand what Erica was saying and just smiled in response. But Erica, with a serious face, rummaged through her bag and handed me a photo. "Mom, look."
"Is this real?"
I couldn't stop trembling from fear. But this revealed who had been causing me harm all along. I can't forgive them. I trusted them. Anger welled up from the depths of my stomach, and I couldn't hold it in any longer. However, there were still too many uncertainties to corner the perpetrator for sure. So, I sent a message to Marty saying, my hospital stay has been extended by a week. And I informed him that I had been transferred to another hospital due to a lack of beds, and that hospital did not allow visitors. A week later, I returned home. If you had told me the day you were getting discharged, I would have come to pick you up right away. Marty said this with a smile as he returned from work.
Thanks. But I can't get into a car driven by you. After all, you're trying to take my life.
I then showed Marty a photo.
Whoa! What's this? When did?
The photo clearly showed Marty pushing me off the cliff in the dark.
There are no security cameras there, and I even turned off the car's dash cam. How does this exist?
It's no wonder Marty was puzzled. After all, this photo was taken by Erica using my dad's Polaroid camera, a camera that could capture psychic images. Actually, Erica had a mysterious ability to sense danger in advance and capture those moments with my dad's camera. Her power manifested around the same time I started encountering dangerous situations.
Mom, something scary is going to happen, so don't go anywhere.
One day, Erica suddenly handed me a photo. I was safe from the broken bicycle brakes and the loose ladder screws thanks to Erica. However, if this became known to the public, Erica would surely be viewed with suspicion. So, we decided to keep Erica's mysterious power a family secret. I had confided in Chloe, but since Marty and I had stopped talking, I never got the chance to tell him. Erica said she couldn't tell who was behind the first two incidents. But this time, she clearly saw Marty trying to get rid of me.
I have to tell Mom. But I can't get through to her phone. What should I do?
Erica, do you know where you are? Can you see anything around you? After patiently gathering information from Erica, Chloe figured out it was the hill full of memories with Marty I had often talked about. When she rushed there, I was found collapsed at the bottom of the cliff as Erica sensed, already being rescued by a passerby who happened to be there first. Later, while preparing for my hospital stay, Chloe got hold of my dad's Polaroid camera from my house. Erica had captured the scene of Marty's crime and brought it to show me in the hospital.
This is fake. You're trying to frame me. Then how do you explain this, Marty? You brought a young girl from work to our house while I was away.
I played a video on my mobile phone showing Marty and the woman getting cozy.
There's no way an amateur like me could make this video. Isn't it time you admitted it?
I pointed to the hidden camera installed in the room.
How did you manage to do all this while you were in the hospital?
I had lied about my extended hospital stay to gather evidence of Marty's wrongdoing, running around from Chloe's house where I was staying. Initially, I was jealous of Marty and Chloe's relationship. However, it was a misunderstanding. While I don't know about Marty's intentions, Chloe's friendliness towards him was merely out of politeness. Chloe supported me to the fullest in delivering retribution to Marty.
How could you betray me like this?
Now. Have some tea and let's talk this over calmly. He suddenly suggested having tea. But Erica had already psychically captured Marty's actions.
What, did you put something dangerous in it?
I casually pulled out a photo of Marty adding some powdery substance into the cup.
Yikes!
Marty was completely taken aback and shuddered in fear. Confess everything. I pressed, and he began to speak, his voice shaking. According to Marty, he had fallen in love at first sight with a new employee, started dating her, and wanted to marry her. However, he was concerned that she worked at the same place as us.
If I divorced Cheryl and remarried soon after, she might get labeled as the bad woman who stole someone's husband, right?
That would be too pitiful.
Are you saying you tried to kill me to protect your mistress? If Cheryl was out of the picture, she wouldn't be looked at strangely, and I wouldn't have to deal with the hassle of a divorce.
It was perfect. Marty also confessed to orchestrating the dangerous incidents that had been occurring around me.
You're the worst. Fine, I'll give you what you want and divorce you. But I wonder if you'll be able to be with your mistress. What do you mean?
It seems she wasn't really interested in you. By this time, I had already contacted the mistress and spoken to her. It turns out she was attracted to Marty because he was the husband of the high-achieving Cheryl. She was just basking in the superiority of being pursued by such a man.
So, she wasn't actually in love with me?
Indeed, I was well respected in the company, and the reason I didn't resign was that the upper management went to great lengths to retain me. The mistress agreed to pay a settlement and promised to resign without seeing Marty again. Faced with the sudden breakup and the realization that she never loved him, Marty was tearful. Also, this incident was reported to the company, and I was interviewed by HR. So, I've reported everything that you did to me.
What, really? If you do that, I won't be able to stay at the company. Cheryl, help me. You're the only one who can save me now. The nerve you have to say something like that. We're getting a divorce, and you'll be paying alimony and child support. And prepare yourself, because I'm also going to the police.
I had recorded Marty's confession earlier with a voice recorder. This should be able to prove his wrongdoing. Marty stood there as if his soul had left his body, but I decided to give the final blow. Oh, and there's also this. I took out another photo and held it up in front of Marty. It depicted Marty as a homeless man in the future. Of course, this was also psychically captured by Erica.
I don't want this. Absolutely not. Please. Cheryl, forgive me.
Marty clung to me, sobbing and repeatedly apologizing. However, what he had done was absolutely unforgivable.
I never want to see your face again. Don't ever show up in front of me. You deserve to go to hell. Damn it.
While looking down coldly at Marty, who had collapsed in tears, I called the police. The officers arrived and took Marty away. After being interrogated, Marty confessed to everything and was charged with some crime. The company took the incident seriously, and Marty was terminated. I got divorced, demanded $30,000 in settlement money from Marty in the divorce court, and $500 a month for child support, and the mistress agreed to pay me $10,000. With no income, Marty borrowed money from shady lenders to pay me, living in fear of debt collectors and sleeping in parks. It turned out just like Erica's psychic photo had predicted. However, Erica's mysterious ability disappeared after a while. I don't know what it was, but I think it's for the best. I was promoted at my current job, with a significant salary increase. Thanks to that, Erica and I are now enjoying our days happily together. Mommy's promise comes first, so please go to the hospital with this. My husband takes out $20 from his wallet and hands it to me. Overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events, I could only stand dumbfounded, watching him drive away in his car. Unbelievably, he left his wife, struggling with her water broken, to prioritize picking up and dropping off his mother for her hobby classes. Despite the harassment from his mother and the numerous difficulties I faced, I tolerated it all, thinking of our soon-to-be-born child. But now, it's clear to me. Someone who treats their child so poorly doesn't deserve to be a parent. Bearing the recurring pain, I made up my mind to face childbirth alone. My name is Kristen. I married Scott right after graduating from college. Scott and I have an age difference of 3 years, and we have led a fairly happy life. He was one of my college clubmates. He seemed to have taken a liking to me when I joined as a freshman, and looking back, his passionate advances were almost embarrassing. As a young adult, a guy's appealing inevitably seemed cool, and I reciprocated his affection, leading to a smooth relationship from 3 months after my enrollment until graduation. Even after marriage, he was deeply in love with me, so I never worried about infidelity. He boasted at work about his happiness in returning home on time every day to eat the dinner I cooked while it was still warm, so I doubted any woman would intentionally approach him. However, he has always been particularly kind to women, attracting some attention. But since he was always devoted to me, I never let my gaze wander. Yet, there's a reason why I described our seemingly perfect marriage as fairly happy. That reason is his mother, Evelyn's presence. I thought the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict was a thing of the past, but she frowned upon seeing me. What's the purpose for today? It was all of a sudden. You should have informed me in advance so that I could be prepared properly. Besides, you look have no gifts even being invited home. It's just bad manners. You knew you were meeting us, you should have taken care of all of these. Oh, dear, why don't you leave my son and go home today? That's what she said during my first visit to my in-laws' house before our marriage, and being still young, I turned pale with fear. Although I told her about the schedule to visit beforehand, indeed, I should have brought some gifts to meet Evely for the first time at her house. Feeling embarrassed and frustrated at being seen through, I remained downcast for a while. It was my fault for the etiquette breach, but if Evelyn had been a bit more restrained in her words, I wouldn't have been so upset. Because of my failure, I was virtually separated from Scott and had to return home alone from my first visit to my in-laws, leading to a phone call from Scott later.
Mommy was nervous and ended up being a bit harsh. She actually likes you, Kristen, so don't worry. She approves of our marriage and really wants you to visit again.
At that moment, I was infuriated by his optimistic tone. He didn't advise me before visiting her house and wouldn't stop Evelyn when she insulted me right in front of him. Her wanting me to visit again was undoubtedly not her true intention. Would marrying him mean being pressured into living together and facing daily harassment? Surprisingly, she made no such suggestions when I decided to marry Scott. However, relieved for only a moment, she began frequently summoning Scott to her house.
Just when you finally graduated from a distant university and got a job locally, you're getting married. I've been so lonely. Why don't you let Kristen have a break and stay with me for a week or so?
Such messages would arrive for Scott, terrifying me. Showing me the message, he asked, "What should we do?" In his place, I called Evelyn right there and then.
I'm sorry for the inconvenience after your kind consideration, but we still haven't finished unpacking and handling paperwork from the move. I think it will be a while before Scott can relax. Sorry.
When I said this,
just unpack by yourself. Don't always rely on my son.
She grumbled, but I simply nodded along and ended the call. Her offer to ease my burden was just a pretext, but she wanted her beloved son by her side. My anger rose towards Evelyn for her lack of consideration, even though we were newlyweds, and also towards Scott, who just laughed off the situation and wouldn't say no. According to him, Evelyn has always been like this. Her overprotectiveness worsened after divorcing Scott's father, and she even cried and tried to stop him from going to college. Somehow, he convinced her and went, but they kept in constant contact through messages and calls. He trusts his mother, who raised him as a single parent, so their relationship has always been good, as I knew from our dating days. It's great to be caring towards a child and a mother, but as adults, there should be a proper distance. However, this closeness was normal for them, and I knew it wasn't right to interfere in another family's dynamics. If it weren't for this, Scott, who is serious about both work and house chores and has a good personality, would have been perfect, so I tried to accept it. But it wasn't long before I couldn't overlook the excessive closeness between the two. One holiday, when Scott usually sleeps till noon, he woke up earlier than me and started preparing to go out. "Did we have plans to go somewhere today?" I asked. "I'm going out shopping with Mommy, so you can stay and sleep." And he replied unbelievably. Apparently, Evelyn wanted to buy clothes and asked him for his opinion. Angry at his willingness to go, "We have a day off together for the first time in a while, let's do something." I controlled my emotions and suggested, but Scott shook his head. "I'd like that, but I've already promised Mommy, and she seems to be waiting outside." Shocked by his words, I went to the entrance in my pajamas. Looking out the window, I saw Evelyn's bright red car parked in the yard. Noticing my gaze, Evelyn got out of her car, smirking, with her bright red lipstick.
"Scott, you're late." "Oh, Kristen is still asleep? Such a lazy wife for my son." Maybe I should buy you an alarm clock as a souvenir?
Mocking me, she affectionately took Scott's hand and led him to the passenger seat. I was dumbfounded by their close relationship and could only watch Evelyn's car drive away swiftly. After this incident, Scott's behavior began to change gradually. He hardly did any housework he used to do routinely and often went to his mother's house almost every weekend. His attitude towards me changed too, becoming more demanding. "Kristen, you're too lazy. If I'm off, you just sleep along. Can you call that fulfilling your duties as a housewife? You don't even put on makeup when you're at home. It's not good to slack off just because you're a wife. Mommy is worried about you too. Why don't you visit her alone sometime?" I didn't know what Evelyn was saying about me, but his agreement was troubling. He had never mentioned napping or makeup during our relationship. But as he said, perhaps Evelyn was genuinely concerned about my behavior. I tried to convince myself of this multiple times, but knowing Evelyn's behavior towards Scott, it seemed more like harassment. I thought Evelyn's curse would change once we had a child. Soon after my doubts about Scott began, I discovered I was pregnant. He was thrilled, promising to support me. But Evelyn's harassment intensified. Summoning Scott for trivial tasks like shopping, doctor visits, and cleaning her house, effectively leaving me alone. When I explained Evelyn's malicious intentions to him, it backfired. Suddenly, he became infuriated and said, "Every time Mommy sees you, she talks about you. How you should go back to your parents' house, or how you need time alone. Getting angry over such things will affect the baby in your womb. Just indulge in Mommy's feelings." He began leaving me alone more often. As time passed, my morning sickness worsened, and I told him I wanted him to stay with me as much as possible because I felt uneasy being alone. But Scott replied, "What can I do even if I'm with you? Mommy also wanted to be alone during her pregnancy, didn't even want to see Dad's face." He wouldn't listen to anything I said. Feeling physically and mentally unstable, I lost the energy to argue back and resolved to fight this battle alone. Then, one day, while Scott and I were shopping for baby items, we bumped into his colleague who said to me, "Scott, I heard you've been actively attending parenting classes. Your home bookshelf is filled with parenting books, right? Accompanying your wife for shopping today, you're going to be a great dad for sure. Can't wait for your child to be born." Shocked, "Huh?" I blurted out. Scott quickly intervened, "Please stop," laughing off in a joking manner. Turns out, Scott had been pretending at work to be an attentive new father, even fabricating stories. I kept silent about this to his colleague to avoid any trouble, but felt a rising anger inside. Still, he continued to prioritize his time with Evelyn, and whenever I met his colleagues, "Your wife has caught herself an ideal husband," they would say. Such incidents gradually made me distrust his actions and words. I can't say for sure if this stress was the cause, but one weekend, while preparing lunch, I noticed my pants were wet. A thought crossed my mind, and I rushed to the bathroom. As I suspected, my water had broken. I yelled towards the room where Scott was still sleeping, telling him to get the car ready immediately. He, still groggy, became anxious upon hearing about the water break and supported me as I walked. The nurses had repeatedly told us to come to the hospital immediately if my water broke, as there could be urgent risks. Scott, slightly panicked, helped me into the car amidst my contractions. Just as we started driving, his mobile phone rang. Unable to answer while driving, I glanced at the screen while struggling with the pain. Seeing Evelyn's name, I had a bad feeling. The phone kept ringing, and after staring at the screen for a while, I reluctantly answered. "Scott, where are you? It's Wednesday, the day of my sewing class. Did you forget?" Her flirting voice terrified me, but I explained to her, "Evelyn, actually, my water just broke, and Scott is taking me to the hospital right now." As soon as I spoke, Evelyn yelled as if she was a different person. "That's your problem, isn't it? I don't care. Using Scott, who's resting, as a taxi is quite a position you're in. Let me talk to Scott. Today is my regular sewing class day, and I have a prior appointment." I was speechless at her disregard, even for her grandchild's well-being. Her shrill voice continued to echo, even as I remained silent. "Sorry, Kristen," Scott muttered. For a moment, I thought he was apologizing for Evelyn yelling at me. But then I realized Scott had walked around to the back seat where I was lying and opened the door. Confused and enduring the pain, I was stunned. Then he said, "I had promised to drive Mommy, so could you take a taxi or an ambulance from here? I'll definitely catch up later, so go ahead."
Wait a minute! Are you prioritizing a sewing class over your own child? Since you won't listen to me, please convince Evelyn yourself. The pain is getting worse, hurry!
I raised my voice out of desperation, but he, frowning as well, replied, "It's a weekly commitment, can't be helped, right? I'm sorry I forgot to tell you about it. Here's some money, please manage with this." He took out $20 from his wallet and shoved it into my bag. Then he got back in the driver's seat and left without hesitation.
I can't believe it!
The place where he dropped me off was still close to our house. Concerned about the neighbors seeing me, I hurriedly searched for a taxi company. The amniotic fluid continued to trickle down my legs, and panic set in as I realized the danger to my unborn child. Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled with the phone, wondering why my baby and I had to suffer like this.
Kristen!
Startled, I turned around and saw a familiar face.
You look terrible! Forget talking, just get in the car!
The person got out of their car, gently supported me, and helped me into the back seat. Her husband adjusted the seat and drove. My memory of what followed is hazy. Upon reaching the hospital, I was quickly wheeled in a wheelchair and taken to a prepared room by nurses. The pain was so severe that I was moaning, but I was told there was still time before delivery, so I rested there. The pain was so intense that I nearly lost consciousness, and suddenly, my mobile phone rang. Thinking it might be a callback from a call to my mother during the journey, I was shocked to see it was Scott. Looking at the clock, it was already evening. 3 hours had passed since I left, and in disbelief, I decided not to answer. But as the calls persisted, I answered in irritation.
Kristen, help me! I want you to explain the situation.
Not a single word of concern for me, and I had no idea what had happened to him. Help me. That's it. Even if he was being eaten by a crocodile, I had no obligation to help someone who could abandon his own child.
Who do you think you are, saying such things?
I yelled through the phone at him and hung up. Some time later, I went into labor alone. Though I wished for Scott's support, I was better off without a foolish man who couldn't prioritize correctly. Instead, a kind nurse supported me, and by late night, my much-awaited baby was born safely. Exhausted, I fell asleep quickly after the birth. The next morning, a nurse came to my room first thing to tell me that Scott had come. Apparently, he had arrived right after the birth, but seeing how deeply I was sleeping, the nurse kindly sent him away. Honestly, I felt I never needed to see him again. But when he entered the room, looking tired, I couldn't help but ask him what happened. The person who picked me up and took me to the hospital was Misty, an older lady in the neighborhood with whom I was always friendly. She had been like a mother to me, caring for me like her own daughter since I was newly married and insecure. When she asked about Scott in the car, I told her he was taking Evelyn to her hobby class, and she got angry as if it were her own matter. Little did I know that this would end up cornering Scott. After dropping me off, Misty spread the story throughout the neighborhood. Being sociable and always chatting with friends, her influence was significant, and her friends seemed to have confronted Scott en masse. The trouble that he wanted help with was apparently this situation. With that, a huge commotion had formed around our house with many people gathering. As panicked as he was, seeking my help in that situation was clearly a lack of intelligence. I hadn't heard from Evelyn at all, and my mind was already made up.
I'm sorry, but can you leave? I'm not feeling well, and my parents are about to arrive.
Do our parents know about this? I want to apologize. Can I stay?
He spoke in a pitiful, muttering voice.
What are you saying? I don't care about your apologies.
I'm busy, so please leave.
Don't say that! Where's the baby? I just want to see her and then I'll go.
Just leave. There are other pregnant women here, so get out. I replied coldly and, as he still stood there, I turned my back, lay down, and covered myself with a blanket.
Hey, I'm sorry. Can you call Mommy for me? I want to send her a picture of the baby. Can I call a nurse?
Unbelievably, Scott reached out and shook me, just as I was about to lose my patience and push him away.
What are you doing? Don't touch her.
My parents entered the room. My mother rushed to my side and pushed him away.
How dare you shake someone who just gave birth? And to show up without considering the situation. I'm disappointed in you. Get out now.
Her fierceness, which I had never seen before, overwhelmed Scott, and he finally left the room. My father followed him, likely giving Scott a thorough scolding. During my hospital stay, I refused to see him and took the baby back to my parents' house after being discharged. Concerned about him doing something, I initiated the divorce over the phone without meeting him. I told him about the divorce papers to be mailed and the compensation claim, ignoring any objections from him. The compensation was for the scrapes and bruises I got when he forcefully made me get out of the car. He tried to make excuses, but I silenced him by mentioning the testimony of Misty and her husband and the photos of the injuries taken that day. The lawyer said the costs for his malicious actions towards a pregnant woman would be significant. While I was busy with the baby, Evelyn barged into my parents' house once. The rumor spread by Misty persisted, and the neighbor's gaze was cold. She blamed everything on me for not respecting her and her son, but my strict father handled it all. Both Evelyn and Scott were dealt with by my father, making me think it should have been this way from the start. But he said, the head of the family doesn't always stand out in the open. He was strangely trying to be cool about it. When I became accustomed to parenting, I invited Misty to my parents' house and introduced her. She quickly became friends with my mother, as they were of the same generation, and we all agreed to keep in touch. During that visit, Misty shared a story she had heard from a friend who works part-time at my ex-husband's company. Her friend, like Misty, loves gossip and apparently let slip the story of Scott to others. This quickly spread and was exaggerated, leading to a decline in his reputation. The contrast between his portrayal as a dedicated new father and the reality had a significant impact, and he resigned from his job, facing cold treatment from his bosses and colleagues. Now in his late 30s, jobless and without qualifications, he became a recluse, living off Evelyn's pension and savings, fearful of the neighbor's judgment. Years later, out of the blue, I received another call from him. Hey, where are you? I'm in front of your parents' house, but nobody's inside. His first words were curt, so I responded similarly. Can't you understand? We've moved. What do you want?
Moved? Did you use the compensation money I gave you to enjoy yourself? Come back right now, let's start over. Mommy wants to see you too.
Your words make no sense. Why would I benefit from going back to you? Still talking about Mommy after all this time? I don't want to hear anything from you, so don't call me again. I hung up without waiting for a reply, and my phone kept lighting up for a while. After finally setting up call blocking, I started receiving messages from him, asking for reconciliation. I read them just in case, but they were all nonsensical, saying things like,
"Don't you feel sorry for the child not having a father? It's ungrateful not to let Mommy see you after all she's done for you."
So, I deleted all the messages and changed my email address. Although what happened was awful, it allowed me to proceed with the divorce advantageously and impose sanctions on him. Having such a worthless person in our lives would be worse for my child. Thinking so, I've been enjoying a relaxed parenting life, supported by my parents, who have become wonderful grandparents.